All right. Good morning, everybody. I am New York State Senator Pete Harckham. My partner for this venture is New York State Senator Liz Krueger, Chair of the Finance Committee. And we're also joined by New York State Senator Rachel May. To those of you who are watching this on social media, this is the second of a two-part series of roundtables that the Senate is holding on the CLCPA, how New York State gets back on track to meet our goals. Our first couple of weeks ago was with a bunch of NGOs to get their perspective, what the challenges were, where the opportunities are, how we can get back on track. And today is a two-part panel. The first will be for municipal officials. We talk about the challenges our municipalities are facing and also the opportunities and how the state can help, as well as then state agencies who will have the benefit of both panels worth of testimony, and then they can respond to the testimony, and we will have a vibrant conversation. These are not formal hearings. These are meant to be conversational. And to our panelists today, I want to thank you. You know, we talk a lot about the state and our climate goals, but you're the ones who are on the front lines. You're the ones who live with the dirty fossil fuel infrastructure. You're the ones who are working to decarbonize your buildings. You're the ones who are uh, working so hard at energy efficiency. And so we want to hear your perspective on what the state can do to be a better partner. And Justin, I would just say we've been joined by Senator Michelle Hinchey. If we can let her into the room, that would be wonderful. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and partner and colleague in this venture, Senator Liz Krueger. Liz?
Good morning. Thank you, Pete. And yes, we are partners and friends in this mission. And I have to say, I was very excited to participate because as the finance chair, I know besides saving the planet and making sure everybody's lights turn on, this whole discussion is also about where's the money to do what we need to do? How are we going to make energy more affordable? How are we going to put the state back on its targets to actually reach the sustainability goals we know we have to? And look, I'm an elected official, so I get to say whatever I want. So some of the people coming up are state representatives of other agencies. You know, the Trump administration is doing disasters to our goals, and they are putting us so far behind. And there was even a Paul Krugman column this morning in the Times about how we have already lost the energy fight to China. And if we got back on schedule and tried to do everything we needed to do, we'll probably never get back the priority that we have in the world for energy. They've already done so much damage. So I really believe the importance of what we are hearing from you is not only what real life is going on in your localities and for the state of New York, but everybody's best ideas about how we go it alone as the state of New York or in conjunction with our other regional partners in other states and get ourselves moving the right direction, because otherwise, I don't even know what the next roundtable will be about, frankly. So I'm just going to do a few basic line outs of the day. So again, our first hour of the roundtable, running from 10 to 11, we'll be hearing from representatives of 4 localities in the state. And then, okay, so sorry, I'm supposed to introduce you all right now. So first up will be Jen Metzger, Ulster County Executive and previously a state senator with many of us. Then Elijah Hutchinson, Executive Director, New York City Mayor's Office of Climate, Environment, and Environmental Justice. And he's joined by Katie Schmid, who is going to be supporting him in answers. And she's the Deputy Executive Director of that same office in New York City. Then we have Ann Spalding, Manager of Environmental Quality, the City of Rochester, and Leo Wigman, Director of Solar Programs for Sustainable Westchester. Invited but not able to attend, This is Ed Romaine from Suffolk County Executive. We wanted to get a diversity of examples from sort of big and small New York at the municipal level. So each of them will be presenting for approximately 3 minutes. And then we will, I know it's not fair, but we have everybody's testimony and it will be made available. Again, everybody who's testifying at either of these roundtables as the one that we did last week, that testimony is up and available for people to review. So we're sorry for such short timelines. Then senators will be able to ask questions. The chairs on the committee, which I guess right now are Pete and myself, will have 6 minutes for questions and answers. Otherwise, all other senators will have 4 minutes. And if time remains, we'll allow for second rounds of questions. Senators should use the Zoom raise hand function so that we know, Pete and I know, who's waiting in line to ask questions. Locality representatives should please feel free to chime in if you have a response. No need to wait to be called upon. The event is being recorded and shared with other senators, as well as being publicly posted on YouTube and the New York State Senate website. So I think with that, we're going to jump right into our representatives, starting with Jen Metzger, Ulster County Executive. Good morning.
Good morning. First, I just want to thank you, Senator Krueger, Senator Harckham, Senator May, Senator Hinchy, all of you here today. You are all committed to addressing the climate crisis we face, and I just really appreciate you holding this roundtable. When I sat on your side of the table as a state senator during the first Trump administration, we worked hard to pass the CLCPA because it fell to states to lead. Today, the rest of the world continues to forge ahead on climate despite failed leadership in Washington, as was made clear at last month's climate summit at the UN. If New York were a country, we'd be the 8th largest economy in the world, as I like to remind people. We also have a responsibility to forge ahead. In Ulster County, we're moving forward aggressively to reduce emissions from sources over which the county government has control, government facilities and operations. But reaching CLCPA targets on a community-wide basis will remain elusive without stronger state action to implement the Climate Act and Scoping Plan. The draft New York State Energy Plan makes no mention of the Cap and Invest program that has been under development. The Climate Act tasks DEC with creating economy-wide regulations, and this is one of the few tools we have to reduce emissions from key sectors like transportation as federal standards are rolled back. The program would also provide a revenue stream to help fill gaps created by these enormous federal funding cuts, over $500 billion in climate and energy program cuts. Rather than backing away from this approach, we should be engaging with other like-minded states and building on the success of RGGI to align those approaches regionally. Now, there's very legitimate concerns about taking action on climate in the face of today's affordability challenges. I see those challenges every day in my community with people struggling just to put enough food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. The Cap and Invest program has to be designed to mitigate regressive impacts, but that is just not enough. It's important to recognize that reducing inequality and addressing affordability challenges are themselves climate solutions. We need progressive income, tax reform, not just income, but tax reform generally in this state, especially given the cruel and regressive federal budget that was just signed into law this summer. It's unrealistic to think that a family can afford to invest in heat pumps for their home when they're struggling to pay for food and healthcare. New York has an opportunity, like it did the last time when I was in the Senate, to really lead in this moment and demonstrate a model of governance that contrasts sharply with the federal government, one that actually protects people today and in the future. I've made a number of specific recommendations in my written comments, and I'm happy to talk about them, answer questions, and thank you again for having me.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Jen. We definitely will have questions. And I have to ask a technical question. Did we agree that we're doing questions after each person? Or are we having all people testify? I think all people testify.
Everyone on the panel testifies and with the questions are for
Right.
everyone.
Good, just double checking that I didn't start off wrong. Thank you, Pete. All right,
Thank you.
next we have Elijah Hutchinson, Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice in the little town I'm from, New York City. Welcome, Elijah.
Thank you so much, Senators. We really appreciate you all taking the time for us to be here. And I'm joined also by Katie Schmidt, our Deputy Executive Director that leads our energy and buildings portfolio at MOCEJ. So New York City fully supports the goals of the CLCPA, but recent decisions at the state level undermine our shared ability to meet climate mandates and protect the health and safety of New York City residents. Projects critical to this transition off fossil fuels, Clean Path New York, and a New York City public policy transmission need were canceled by the Public Service Commission. Meanwhile, the state is now supporting the Northeast Supply Enhancement Pipeline, NESE, a project previously denied by the Department of Environmental Conservation and wholly at odds with the intent of the CLCPA. Furthermore, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority has yet to meaningfully implement Cap and Invest, or to provide the funding tools municipalities need to enforce building decarbonization policies like Local Law 97. And while a Tier 1 solicitation was issued for upstate renewables, no plan exists to deliver that power downstate. These decisions delay urgently needed investments and will leave New York City's grid reliant on fossil fuels for generations. We estimate that emissions in 2030 will be 6 million tons higher due to these setbacks, effectively rolling back decades of tireless efforts and significant financial investments. So let me be really clear. New York City is also doing its part. We're achieving a 94% engagement rate for Local Law 97's first reporting period. We've transformed food and wastewater into renewable energy, and we've deployed over 30 megawatts of solar on city property, with more coming. But the state must also step up with this work with us as partners, including building new transmission infrastructure to New York City, denying NESE a DEC water quality certification, creating financial tools to support New York City buildings to comply with Local Law 97, advancing and expanding energy affordability programs, implementing Cap and Invest, and expanding the New York City Housing Authority's NYCHA's Clean Heat for All program. The infrastructure and funding choices made by the state will determine whether we meet our climate goals or fall short, and New York City is ready to act with urgency as this moment demands. Thank you.
Stop putting myself on mute, sorry, so that I can get back on again. Next up is Ann Spalding, the Manager of Environmental Quality for the City of Rochester.
Thank you very much, and thank you on behalf of Mayor Evans of the City of Rochester for this opportunity to speak with you all today. The city, Mayor Evans, we've fully embraced the CLCPA's vision, and we are actually proud of the progress that we've made doing what we can to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from both municipal operations and in the city as a whole. We've completed multiple steps towards the goals of the CLCPA, and just a few I'll list. We established our Office of Energy and Sustainability, which manages our climate program here at the city. We did adopt a community-wide climate action plan as well as a municipal climate action plan. And I'm proud to say that for our municipal operations climate action plan, we actually exceeded our reduction by about 13%. When we measured our greenhouse gas emissions 5 years after the plan was written. We've invested in electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging stations. We've done lots of public outreach on climate. We have some housing projects that are all electric, which we're really excited about. But as others have stated, that's just not enough. The city has an aging building stock. We have a high rates of poverty. It's difficult to get people to engage without resources in decarbonizing their homes. Also, businesses are struggling. It's a difficult time, particularly with the elimination or reduction of federal tax credits and federal programs. At the city, for example, we had a $1 million EPA grant awarded to us under the Environmental Justice Government to Government program that was canceled when the new administration came in. That would have allowed us to upgrade homes for low-income individuals through our existing rehab program to be all-electric, fossil fuel-free homes. So that was a difficult opportunity that we lost. To help us achieve the CLCPA's goals, we have a few things that I think would make a big difference. Obviously, increased funding, expanded dedicated climate implementation funding would go a long way to help us meet our goals and help the community, including the NYSERDA Clean Energy Communities Grant Program that we've been able to take advantage of and done lots of great things with. Recently, we got a $300,000 grant to replace our aging streetlights with LED streetlights. So that was a really great opportunity and a pretty low cost win for the climate in Rochester. Expanding building retrofit and electrification support would be wonderful. Clean energy workforce development. We have a poverty problem. We have an underemployment problem in the city of Rochester. So workforce development funding would be really useful in the clean energy area. There are some opportunities out there for us. We've been very successful with our brownfield job training program. So we have a really great model that could be followed for clean energy workforce development. And we are ready and willing to implement that should funding become available. I think more community outreach targeted to low-income disadvantaged communities would go a long way in helping meet climate goals. Just letting people know that there are things that they can do in their own lives that are relatively low cost and will save them money, I think are really important. So that dedicated outreach, that dedicated community engagement, I think would go a long way and is a great opportunity here in the city of Rochester and in many communities around us. So we're proud to be a partner in achieving New York's climate vision. We're ready, we're willing, we've already done a lot, we know how to do it, but with sustained funding and greater access to state programs and state funding and just a voice at the table like we're getting today, which we certainly appreciate. I think we can go a long way towards meeting the CLCPA goals, meeting Rochester's goals, and making for a better, greener community for all of us. So thank you again for the opportunity to provide our input here. We really appreciate it and look forward to hearing from the rest of you today.
Great. And thank you. And last but not least, Leo Wigman from the Solar Program Sustainable Westchester.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Leo Wigman, and I serve as the Director of Solar Programs for Sustainable Westchester, a nonprofit consortium of all the cities, towns, and villages in Westchester County, including the county government itself. For more than a decade, we've helped local governments, residents, and small businesses put clean energy into practice. To date, we've enrolled thousands of households and businesses in community solar projects, delivering guaranteed savings and measurable emissions reductions. From that experience, both in Westchester County and across New York, one message rings loud and clear: solar works great. When it comes to meeting the goals of New York's Climate Act, distributed solar is the success story. The state is already 68% of the way to its 2030 goal of 10 megawatts installed, with another 31% in the pipeline. That's 99% of the goal, all under budget and ahead of schedule. No other technology matches solar's combination of speed, scalability, and cost effectiveness. Utility scale renewables, offshore wind, and energy storage all face longer timelines, higher costs, and complex permitting hurdles that make 2030 targets hard to reach without stronger policy support. Unfortunately, the form of solar that brings benefits to everyone, community solar, is now stalled. After peaking in 2022, new community solar project applications statewide have fallen by 2/3. Completion rates are down, and many projects have been delayed, sold, or abandoned. The main culprits are policy instability, the premature exhaustion of the community credit incentive, and a shift back to outdated upfront subsidies that reward project size instead of long-term performance. So what should New York do? To keep solar and the Climate Act on track, we urge the state to, number one, double the distributed solar goal to 20 gigawatts by 2035, much of which can be achieved by 2030 with consistent policy support. Number two, restore and modernize performance-based incentives, including reinstating the community credit and updating the value of distributed energy resources so that its E-value, its environmental value, reflects the true social cost of carbon, especially in the downstate region that relies on fossil fuels for over 90% of its electricity. And number three, support energy storage by ensuring that the new statewide fire safety standards are implemented locally, clearing the way for responsible project development. In closing, solar works great, but only when policy works too. With steady, predictable, performance-based incentives and investment, distributed solar and storage can deliver faster, cheaper, and fairer decarbonization than any other technology. Sustainable Westchester stands ready to work with the state leaders to refine these policies, accelerate deployment, and ensure that every New Yorker, regardless of income or zip code, shares in the benefits of a clean energy future. Thank you for your leadership and partnership in meeting this shared challenge.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to Pete Harcum to have the first set of questions.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you to all our panelists. Fascinating testimony. There's a lot to chew over. First, a general question to all of you. If you could name one thing that the state is doing well to assist you that you'd like to see expanded, and one thing that either the state is failing to do or has stopped doing that would be beneficial to aid you in your efforts, that would be great. So one positive, one negative from each of you. Let's start with Jen.
Wow. Okay. I'm trying to think of, I mean, you know, this was, I think you passed it back in 20, but basically the one recommendation that was very important that from the scoping plan that you passed was the electrification requirements for new buildings. That is going to be game changing. We're already doing that anyway here in New York. I mean, in Ulster County, that is what builders are doing. But you know, what we're not doing well enough is supporting investments in existing buildings. And as we know from, you know, our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, buildings are have the biggest share of our greenhouse gas emissions, and there's huge challenges there. We have some of the oldest building stock in the country, but we also, again, as I mentioned earlier, have a lot of people that cannot afford to make the upfront capital investments to make the investments they need to make in their homes that would bring all these other benefits, like reducing their utility bills that they can't afford, and improving their health. And so there's a lot of benefits to it, but the upfront costs aren't there. In my comments, I talked about the Empower program being essentially broken and really needs to be fixed, because that's the only tool available for low-income households.
Great, thank you. Elijah.
Oh, you're on mute, Elijah. Still on mute.
Hi,
There we go.
there we go. Those buttons are tricky.
Yes.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to flag was we were really excited about some of the progress that we were able to make with J51 and some of our attempts to reframe to the legislature the importance of some of these laws as actually helpful for climate, and not just from the housing perspective to expand the people who consider it of value, and the applicability of how that could particularly help low-income co-ops and condos in New York City with compliance with Local Law 97. And there's going to need to be a back and forth continuously between the council here and the state legislature on renewing and updating the requirements for that. And some of the work that we were doing to advance CPACE as well with the state legislature, we'd want to see that come together and be better in the next session. And NYSERDA has also been working with us in a lot of different ways across their energy efficiency and electrification programs to work with multifamily properties. There's still more work that we need to do there to make sure that the programs truly grapple with the complexity of downstate projects, and the programs work for, large multifamily buildings that are sometimes difficult. But it's great progress to see some of the work we've been able to do with NYSERDA on the building side.
Great, thank you. Ann?
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Jen Metzger said regarding the electrification requirement for new buildings. I think that's great that the state has done that, and we've certainly seen that here in Rochester with new homes and multifamily and other types of buildings being fully electrified. I think that we definitely need to see more focus, though, on resources for disadvantaged people, disadvantaged homeowners, renters. It's very difficult for most of them to access resources, and having some of those resources go away is making it even more difficult. Some of the utility rebates are going away, some of the utility programs, the Empower program is being decimated, of course. So it's going to be even more difficult for people with limited means, limited ability, limited even time to deal with some of this stuff, to access these resources. And, we have that aging housing stock that I mentioned earlier, that there's a lot of homes that need a lot of work. They're great homes. They're beautiful homes in many cases, but they're very inefficient, and it makes it very difficult for our low-income residents to keep up with their utility payments. It causes increased homelessness, insecurity, and leads to all kinds of other problems. So I think just that assistance and a boost from the state regarding home energy efficiency and electrification would be extremely important.
Great, thank you. And finally, Leo.
Sure. I'll say that since we work very closely with our local cities, towns, and villages, one thing that the villages, cities, towns, and are all looking forward to is engaging with the Climate Smart Communities program as sort of with the next phase of that work. And so we're delighted that the Climate Smart Communities and Clean Energy Communities programs are going to be continuing, and we look forward to engaging with our local municipalities on that to help them proceed at the local level. As far as one thing that hasn't worked out so well, in 2017, NYSERDA launched the Value Distributed Energy Resource Calculator for solar energy developers to figure out what the future value of the kilowatt hours that they would be injecting would be worth to the utility, and that they would be rewarded on the performance of that project over 25 years from the utility based on the hourly and locational based value of each kilowatt hour. When the megawatt block program and the community credit ran out in 2022, the state went back to the outmoded upfront money in the megawatt block program and reinvigorated that, as opposed to doing a little bit of harder brain work to go and figure out how to create a better long-term performance-based investment. And the solar industry would react very well to a performance-based incentive over the life of a project, as opposed to just getting a few dollars up front to lower your upfront costs, but not being rewarded for performance. So I think that that's something that needs to be revisited, particularly to incentivize solar and battery storage going forward.
Great, thank you. That's my time.
Okay, I don't see other hands yet, so I'll just jump in. Oh, Michelle Hinchy's camera's on. Do you want to ask questions, Michelle?
Senator May can go first. Her hand's up. I'm happy to follow.
Okay. So wait, whose hand was up? Did you say? I'm looking.
Senator May.
Senator May, sorry.
Thank you. And thank you all for your presentations. This just a quick question. I saw a graph the other day that showed the things that individuals can do to reduce their carbon footprint the most, and going car-free is one of the major ones. But a lot of municipalities, this probably isn't for New York City, but other municipalities that are represented, you know, urban planning, town planning doesn't make it easy for people to do that. So I wonder if any of you has considered some kind of efforts or policies in that direction as part of a decarbonization plan.
I can talk to that for a bit. I don't know. Did you want me to? Can I just start talking, guys?
Yep, go ahead.
So you know, we've been very focused on that at the county level. I mean, just in New York State, you know, it's municipalities, villages, and towns that have authority over land use planning, but we are at the county level. I mean, we have these it's my twin top priorities are, you know, climate and housing. And essentially, you know, we are providing funding and incentivizing, you know, transportation oriented development and smart growth generally. We put a lot of effort into our expanding our trail network, our rail trail network, as I I I commute when I can on a rail trail 9 miles from my town to my office. It's awesome. And we're trying, you know, it's great for the local economy, it's great for tourism, but it's also a way for people to safely get around. And the road, this is an really important issue. If we want people to not take cars, we have to address speed limits and other huge like roadway challenges in rural communities. I mean, we need control over speed limits because all of our main streets are state roads and people are dying. They're getting hit and they're dying. We also are investing a lot in our public transit system, our municipal bus system, UCAT. We're in the process of expanding routes and schedules, and we're also electrifying that system. So we have 8 electric buses on the road. We have more on order. We worked with NYPA we have, you know, charging infrastructure, and we just, you know, completed a project with NYPA to offset, you know, some of that power daytime charging with solar. So, you know, we're very focused on that, but you know, there's always, you know, it's always a matter of money, right? And you need, you know, definitely more investments, not just in electric school buses, but in electric municipal transit would be helpful.
Yeah, let me follow up with Jen, because I know here in Syracuse, there's a very active micromobility bike share, you know, program, VO program, and it's mostly kind of touted as micromobility and helping people get around, but I'm wondering if there are methods of tracking how that is contributing to greenhouse gas reductions as well.
Yeah, we actually we were just in the process. I think our representative from Rochester said they just finished their community-wide climate action plan. We're in the process of doing that as well and trying to figure out exactly that question, Rachel, of how do you measure that? How do we, like, that's one of our action areas, but how do we measure progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from those kinds of investments and changes? So I don't have an answer for you. It's something we're trying to figure out.
I'm out of time anyway. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, you have your hand up then.
Thank you. And thank you all so much for being here and for your leadership in this space. Leo, you had mentioned a couple times in your remarks battery storage. And I want to, from my understanding, in order for us to fully transition to renewables, which is what we all are aspiring to do as quickly as possible, battery storage is an important component of that equation. And your recommendation is making sure at the local level, our localities adopt the new state regulations for fire code safety. I would love if you could just shed a little bit more light on your understanding for battery storage and what we think we need to do in terms of both sharing accurate information and also what types of regulations or legislation we could be doing there. Because I know there's a number of counties that are actively looking to put resolutions forward that are banning battery storage. And if we actually, again, from my understanding, if we actually really want to transition, that's a core component. So can you just shed a little light on that for us?
Sure, you're exactly right. Energy storage is sort of the holy grail of this whole system. And coupled with clean energy generation, it can solve many of the intermittency issues that are otherwise going to prevail without energy storage. The State Code Council has adopted, as I'm sure you're all aware, in Chapter 12 of the code, the battery storage recommendations, requirements, regulations around safety, public safety, health, and welfare, all of which are totally supported by the battery storage industry, and we're part of the stakeholder process for that. And so we're in the process here, at least in Westchester County, of explaining what these new regulations are and how local municipalities can adopt a local law that enables sensible development to proceed with, local oversight for larger projects as appropriate. And so there are a number of municipalities that have already proceeded with adopting a variation of the statewide recommendation for the local law as published by NYSERDA. And we're working closely with the County Emergency Services Department here in Westchester, where all the incident responders go to get their training to bring elected and leaders, planning boards, zoning boards, and fire departments together to explain these new regulations and how they can protect local health, safety, and welfare while allowing these valuable sort of public infrastructure projects to proceed without spending any investor-owned utility dollars. These are private sector dollars being invested. All of this is very much possible, but it really requires some significant public outreach and education to sort of get communities and get the fire departments comfortable with the fact that under the new technologies and the battery safety systems that are built into these projects, to be aware that in the very rare instance of some negative event occurring, that there are safeguards in place. So we're largely the hesitation has been that there have been a couple unfortunate fires that have that were in the public realm based on old technology and old construction habits and patterns, which are no longer the case. So we're trying to sort of give folks a sense of confidence that these projects, valuable projects, can go forward to stabilize the local grid and to reduce the likely future capital investment by utilities, because now private sector dollars are being invested in this and are then also harvesting the tax credits that come with it, et cetera.
Is there anything that you think that the state should be doing more in this space, recognizing some of those regulations just changed, which are good, but it is what else is missing? What else could we be doing to both help the conversation and also make sure that we're moving forward in this important thing?
Great question. So there are now a number of battery storage installations that are either standalone projects, particularly in the 5 boroughs, or that are integrated with solar, such as at the Croton Harmon train station parking lot, where you've got 4 megawatts of solar integrated with 3 megawatts of battery storage, that are going to be currently already operational or will be operational by the end of the year. So I think the state could help celebrate those as success stories for the most recent evolution of battery storage and solar integration, and begin to highlight those as success stories.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm out of time.
Jen
But
has
any other information on that, I think would be great to send over to us. I think that's a missing component that we don't talk too much about and would love to dig in more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Jen?
If I could just add to this conversation. So we need both utility scale, right? Large scale and distributed battery storage solutions. On the utility scale side, a huge gap is actual planning alongside the utilities, there is a complete disconnect, and I mentioned this in my comments, between utility capital planning and local land use planning processes.
Correct.
Those need to be connected because we are missing all kinds of opportunities to cite these types of projects, to cite community renewable projects, other types of larger renewable resources and technologies, because they're completely out of alignment and kind of left to the market. And then you get a really negative, bad feedback loop, when, you're citing a project like, and where a Catholic school was once. So we need to, these projects, utilities should be required to engage with communities on planning for these kinds of projects. And they should also be required to basically look at their own substations, their own infrastructure, and opportunities to site those larger scale, utility scale installations at the substations, like more directly connected right on their properties. The other point I want to make is on residential storage. I have weighed in with the public. I've had lots of conversations with Public Service Commission. It's in my comments on Central Hudson's resilience plan. We should be looking to what Green Mountain Power is doing, the utility in Vermont, with their home residential battery storage program. The utilities actually, so first of all, it's providing reliability to the homeowners, which is really important in rural areas where power outages are frequent. It's providing reliability and power outages, but it's also enabling the utility to draw on those resources to shave peak, saving Vermont ratepayers millions of dollars. So, I completely agree with Leo's comment earlier about the, paying more attention to and prioritizing distributed energy resources more than we are now, because those are
Hey,
opportunities.
Jen,
Sorry.
we're way over time.
Oh,
Thank
sorry. Okay.
Sorry, thank you. We've been joined by Andrew Gunardis, our senator from Brooklyn, and he has his hand up to ask some questions. Good morning, Andrew.
Thank you, Liz. I was actually on from the beginning, but I was on the webinar link. So I was watching everything, but you guys couldn't see me. So
Sorry.
anyway, I want, and thank you, everyone. This is very informative. I want to take a step back and ask a less substantive question for all of our municipal and local officials. It has long been my feeling and sense that, as some of you have spoken about, like we do a lot and we do a lot of good things. But I find that it's hard to translate the eligibility or applicability of a lot of what we do down to local customers, local constituents. And the way we talk about a lot of these programs or incentives or opportunities, the way we market them, as an educated person, I myself scratch my head many times trying to figure out like what is or is not, what a program does or does not do. And so I'm curious if you have found any of that with your local constituencies, if you find that there are gaps in understanding and knowledge in terms of the state programs that we currently have available, and any thoughts or ideas that you might offer in terms of bridging that gap, if you feel like that gap does exist, or if you find that the gap exists between what you're offering versus your constituents. Did that question make sense to everyone?
Yes, if I may jump in and thank you, Senator Gunnars. We see a lot of the assistance that we're providing people through the New York City Accelerator to be very helpful in helping and having a third party navigate the web of incentives and programs that could be applicable. But helping them come up with a plan is really, really valuable and is an indicator to us, and a great data point for us to look at engagement and to see where people are in their overall trajectory. We're going to be relaunching the New York City Accelerator with more functionality in the coming months, and we're really excited about that piece of it. But overall, I would say we lack a lot of capacity for how energy is just managed within New York City, which is incredibly big and complex. There's energy management that happens at DCAS. We have a small but mighty energy team here at MOCEJ. But I think that there's really a lack of institutional infrastructure around some of these issues. And as we start to get to decarbonizing the grid and thermal energy network projects, developing, scopes around that, there's so much work that will need to be done. I wonder whether we have the right pieces in place, even within New York City, to do all of that work. And I think we will suffer on some of the messaging and the communications without some of that having a more substantial home and being resourced more with a permanent infrastructure to work on delivering these programs and services.
When you say lack of infrastructure, what do you mean? You mean like tech infrastructure or just staff infrastructure? Like in my mind, I'm a New York City resident. I should be able to go to a website and say, I'm interested in XYZ. Here's where I live. And then like I get a menu of what does or does not apply to me, what I'm eligible for, what I'm not eligible for, instead of sending us down rabbit holes or having to make special phone calls to special accelerators to get a caseworker. Like it should be, for dummies, basically, as simple as possible. And I feel like in my own constituent casework here in the office, there's such a disconnect between people who want to take advantage of a lot of these programs that the state offers or local government offers, and they can't navigate it. So when you say infrastructure, explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think just more staffing and capacity at the municipal level would be good. There's been but also improving, and I 100% agree with you on the confusion. I think the websites that we have with NYSERDA and utilities could be very much improved. And what we see even from our our rate case conversations, just how people receive information about what's increasing their utility bill and why rates are increasing is also super, super challenging and is a subject of a lot of discussion, although we're not getting into rate case negotiations here.
Although I'll jump in, Andrew, that I actually think the city system is actually better than the state system. I've tried to help constituents move through the NYSERDA system to figure out what they actually might be eligible for and then even apply for stuff. And it's way too complicated. So I think state and local, the more we can do to actually help people understand, in your situation, these scenarios are probably your best opportunities right now. We
Yeah.
only have, 6 more minutes, and I see the two hands of Jen Metzger and Ann Spalding. So I'm going to let them answer, and then I'm just going to jump in. I probably just have one question that I have time for. Jen?
Yeah, thanks. Just really quickly, so NYSERDA has these energy hubs, regional energy hubs, that are supposed to be connecting with communities and getting them to take advantage of resources. They have like one person for hundreds of thousands of people, so it's not effective. So I will just say that it's a great idea, but the hub should be connected to spokes, and counties should be those spokes and should be supported and connected, because we can work with the hubs to get that information out, but we don't have the capacity. So just putting that out there. I just want to say also, for the low income programs, counties are in very unique positions because we deliver services. We are responsible for Medicaid and SNAP and HEAP and have direct connections with all of these low income customers, but there are barriers to getting them enrolled in these other programs. And that was something I was trying to get off the ground in Ulster County, but there's information sharing barriers. There's all kinds of issues there. And if you all can kind of unpack that so that it's more automatic for people who are in HEAP to enroll and empower, that would be amazing.
Jen, I'm going to follow up with you on that idea separately, because I've been trying to do something similar in New York City. So I'll give you a call. We can talk about that.
Great. And Ann?
Yes, thank you. The Energy Hub is interesting. We have a NYSERDA funded Energy Hub here in Rochester that's actually pretty well staffed. They don't, their outreach isn't solely to the city of Rochester, but even with the resources that they have and the staffing that they have, there's a real disconnect between citizens, particularly low-income citizens, and accessing the information from the hub, from NYSERDA, from the utility, which here is RG&E. It's very difficult to navigate. Even the folks at the hub have difficulty navigating some of these programs. So there's a real lack of clarity, and it's unnecessarily complicated for people who are trying to find out, at all income levels, honestly, what resources are available to them for solar, for heat pumps, for geothermal, for air sealing and insulation, weatherization, all that good stuff. There's resources out there, but they're not being accessed because of the difficulty in just getting the basic information and the overly complicated websites and paperwork and all that stuff that people are wary of in the first place. So I think more resource allocation towards the hubs, I think, would be really helpful.
Thank you. And I guess with the last 2 minutes quickly, so one of the agencies that did not agree to show up today was NYSO, the sort of energy evaluator of the situation in New York, and they just came out with their short-term assessment of reliability report. And so it would have been even more important to have them testifying today. We will be following up with them. But for the city of New York, their report is showing that we're in so much trouble for reliability going forward because we're so behind on so many of the sustainable energy plans that they're talking about having to make sure these 10 peakers in New York City, which are horrendous from an emission perspective and are way past their timeline of functionality, that if without them, we could be seeing brownouts by next summer. Since this is obviously critical for New York City, does your, I guess, office have a plan to help us save this situation before it gets worse?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. We found the report just deeply troubling and concerning as well. The implications to the New York City energy grid, but the environmental justice communities as well who live next to these power plants and generation sites is particularly concerning. But we absolutely need upstate, downstate transmission to be a part of a long-term solution. And while we grapple with the immediate concern, and we're open to whatever the needs are to meet the grid so that we have consistent and reliable power, the upstate, downstate transmission is something that we absolutely have to be pragmatic about to solve those capacity gaps that we know will come online for the 2030s and 2040s and often take 10 years to build. So we're looking at all possible pathways, but we absolutely want to see a new solicitation coming out of the PSC. And we also want to understand the results of the NYSO solicitation. But we absolutely need to accelerate energy storage projects and transmission projects in New York City. We still, are trying to close those peaker plants. This is a difficult moment because we are also a creature of the state, and these are state regulatory decisions that will be made. But the frustrations of New Yorkers will just be substantial for us. And so there isn't currently a plan that we see from the state to bring transmission or renewable energy infrastructure into Zone J downstate. And also see that the continuing needs of data centers and capacity transistor manufacturing facilities in upstate will continue to draw significant power needs, and whether and those costs, who will bear them? Will it be the ratepayers who are bearing the costs for these while the power remains upstate and does not come downstate? We're certainly bearing the costs of the pollution here in New York City.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. And with that, we've hit the 11 o'clock mark. So even though I'm sure we had many more questions and you had many more things to tell us, we actually need to move on to our second part of this hearing. So I want to, on behalf of both committees and all the senators here, thank you all so much for your testimony, for your willingness to come and talk to us today, and for your daily work on behalf of New Yorkers in all the communities you represent. And so we're going to excuse you, although of course you can stay on and listen for the rest of the afternoon as well. Pete, do you have anything else to close this group down with?
Really just want to say thank you for your insights, for everything you do, as Liz said, and for your partnership and your collaboration as we continue to work on these challenging issues.
Again, thank you, everyone. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, so now I am moving us to, and we'll hopefully have our representatives from the state agencies ready and able to jump online. So the next portion, which is scheduled to be from 11 to 2, is a conversation with representatives of a variety of relevant state agencies. And for this portion, each state agency will have, let me just see. The first 20 minutes or so, we will hear brief opening remarks from the representatives, followed by a moderated discussion arranged by topic area. And since we're a small group, we will try to have a free-flowing conversation, and we'll step in as needed to try to keep us on track and on schedule. That's the real challenge, because these are such big issues. Each of these topics could probably fill its own day-long event, and there are many more topics beyond these that are worthy of discussion, but we couldn't put all on because there's just not enough hours in one day. So this conversation is viewed by the legislature as a starting point for some of the most difficult challenges New York State faces at this point in history. So I would like all of us to try to be concise in our questions and our answers. I know that's always a challenge. I'm just going to list off the agencies that will be joining us and their representatives. So Michelle Marcello, Executive Deputy Commissioner, Department of Environmental Conservation. Jessica Waldorf, Chief of Staff, Director of Policy Implementation, Department of Public Service. Charles Imnoshian, SVP, Communications and External Affairs, the New York Power Authority, and John Williams, Chief Policy Officer, the New York State Energy Research and Development Agency. And of course, we asked the agencies to send reps. And we're not getting commissioners, but I got to tell you, we think we're getting the people who probably know the answers better. Yeah, you can go back and tell your commissioners I just said that. So I'm delighted that you're all here with us. And again, we're going to have opening remarks of about 20 minutes. So that works out between the four of you of like 5 minutes each. So Pete, do you want to say anything before they get rolling?
Thank you, Liz. First, I just want to welcome you all. Thank you for joining us. This is meant to be a conversation. As Liz said, this is not a gotcha hearing. This really is a conversation. Hopefully, you all listened to the first roundtable we had with feedback from NGOs. Perhaps you heard some of the feedback from some of the municipalities we just heard. And so we want to build upon that. We want to hear obviously what you're doing, what we can do in collaboration, but also, for you to respond to some of the feedback from some of the stakeholders who we all jointly work with. So that's kind of the goal of this. And then, I just want to take a moment of point of privilege. We're in a time right now where it seems to be free range on government employees, and slings and arrows coming, whether at the federal level or the state level. And I just want to say, and I think I speak on behalf of all the senators here, we appreciate everything that everyone in your agencies do. You're consummate professionals, and the public has to know how hard you and your colleagues work on their behalf. And we just want you to know that we really appreciate everything you do. You know, when the slings and arrows are coming, we've got your back. So with that, I'll pipe down and turn it back over to Liz. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Pete. Okay, so just going in the order that it was printed in, I'm going to start with Michelle Marcello from the Department of Environmental Conservation. Good. It's still morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, thank you, Senator. And first off, Senator Harckham, thank you for saying that. I will make sure to pass that message along to our team. I think we are trying here at DEC to make sure that we are sharing that message, because it is heart-wrenching to watch what's happening for government employees across the country. And I joined from Washington, D.C., so close to home. So on to my more official remarks. Good morning. My name is Michelle Marcello, and I am the new Executive Deputy Commissioner here at the Department of Environmental Conservation. I think I'm on week 5, so very much still new, but I'm very excited to be here. And on behalf of Commissioner-elected in the department, thank you, Chair Kruger, Chair Harckham, and Chair Parker for including us in this critical discussion today. And to you all and to all the senators that are attending today, again, it is a pleasure to meet you all virtually, and I look forward to meeting you all in person in the near future as I really dive into all the work we're doing here at the department. So I joined DEC after working, as I mentioned, for over a decade in Washington, D.C. to help advance federal policies that support ambitious state-level environment and climate action. Unfortunately, I think it goes without saying that that work is under attack right now by the president and his administration. But I am proud to say that under the leadership of Governor Hochul and Commissioner Lefton, that DEC remains steadfast in our commitment to protect the environment and advance climate and energy programs to reach our targets under the nation-leading Climate Leadership and Protection Act. I think a few of the highlights of that work I'd love to touch on include our statewide community air monitoring initiative, which is looking to develop community-driven solutions to reduce air pollution and its effects in disadvantaged communities. We are also reducing potent greenhouse gas emissions in refrigerants by reducing HFCs, and from gas-insulated equipment by reducing sulfur hexafluoride. And it doesn't stop there. We're also implementing DEC's successful orphan well plugging program to reduce methane emissions across the state. And we can't do this work on our own. We know that we need local partners. So that's why we're so proud of our very successful Climate Smart Communities program, where 92% of New Yorkers live in one of our state's 460 registered or more than 165 certified communities, this program is just so important in supporting local efforts across the state to meet the economic and social and environmental challenges posed by climate change. And I cannot go on without saying this work is not possible without the support of legislative leaders like yourself and Governor Hochul in the funding that you continue to provide us. Working with our partner agencies, DEC is supporting hundreds of projects already underway with funding from the historic $4.2 billion Clean Water, Clean Air, and Green Jobs Environmental Bond Act. And that the Bond Act specifically dedicates $1.5 billion to reduce air pollution and fight climate change across the state. Other funding tools that are critical include the $6 billion investment in clean water that we've seen since 2017, which is really helping reduce flooding and other devastating climate impacts in communities across the state. And of course, this funding is in addition to our sustained resources that we couldn't do our work without through the State Environmental Protection Fund. And looking beyond, DEC, we understand here at DEC that there's strength in numbers, especially in the moment we're in right now with our federal government. And we continue to work closely with other like-minded states through coalitions like the U.S. Climate Alliance or through programs like the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. With RGGI, New York has already cut power plant emissions by more than half while raising nearly $3 billion for affordable climate smart investments since 2009. And in addition to that, New York did not only advance zero emission vehicle regulations to help drive the growth of electric vehicle adoption in the state, but thanks to Governor Hochul's leadership, our state is also joining the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition to support widespread electric vehicle use for those who want them. And we are committed to continuing the progress, especially in the transportation space, even as our federal partners are stepping back from their responsibilities. So a long way of saying, and I could go on and take credit for all the fabulous work this department has done before I got here, but I will say that we have made great strides as a state and as a department, and there's plenty to be proud of, but we know there's so much more work to be done. And It goes without saying that the biggest threat to New York's healthy environment right now is the federal government's deregulatory agenda and efforts to cut federal funding that support critical protections that have been in place for decades. But New York will continue to protect our progress and ensure that longstanding legal precedents are not undermined by the political recklessness in Washington. We know that pushing for change and making a difference is never simple, but with the support of you all in the legislature, DEC will continue to advance our efforts and lead on climate. So thank you again for having me here today, and I'm really excited for the discussion that we will have.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and welcome aboard, since apparently you're brand new with us.
Thank you.
Jessica Waldorf, Chief of Staff, Director of Policy for the Department of Public Service. Good morning.
Good morning, Senators, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's roundtable. Since the late 1990s, New York has been a leader in the implementation of clean energy programs and setting targets for the adoption of clean generation and energy efficiency. Since then, we have continuously refined tools to monitor program effectiveness and ensure programs are designed to achieve commission and statutory requirements in pursuit of the state's clean energy goals. In 2019, the legislature passed the CLCPA, establishing a number of goals, including a 70% renewable energy electric grid by 2030 and a zero-emission electric grid by 2040. In response, the Commission modified the Clean Energy Standard, or CES, which now serves as the program designed to achieve the CLCPA's targets while considering the reliability of the system. That focus on reliability within the context of achieving our clean energy objectives is a core principle of the Commission's that actually predates the CLCPA. When the Commission originally established the Clean Energy Standard in 2016, it recognized that the development of new renewable resources, or any resource for that matter, may take more time than anticipated, and if supply is not able to meet the level of demand, prices may increase to a point where it is no longer reasonable for consumers. The Commission recognized the potential need to adjust near-term targets, increase procurements in later years, and focus on actions to facilitate development. In addition to considering reliability, a principle that is built into the text of the CLCPA, the Commission considers affordability to the greatest extent possible. Built into the DNA of the CES, the Commission noted all reasonable efforts to reduce project costs, including the costs associated with siting and interconnection, should first be pursued. And over the last several years, we've done just that. The Commission has made each and every decision in the best interest of ratepayers. Sometimes that means authorizing funding to implement carefully designed energy efficiency programs, and sometimes that means adjusting our strategy in the face of factors outside of the Commission's control. This context is important because New York is at an inflection point with respect to our energy systems. For reasons that range from the COVID-19 pandemic's lingering economic impacts to the new administration in Washington, D.C., recent reports indicate that we will likely not meet the 70% by 2030 target. That does not mean we haven't made significant progress already. The department's recent CLCPA informational report highlights this progress, which reflects the hard work of staff at our agencies, many stakeholders, and consumers in implementing and adopting clean energy solutions. The CLCPA report also highlights the cost to ratepayers of achieving the law's objectives. While the CLCPA is not the main driver of utility bill increases, it does contribute to those increases. That is why we are continuously evaluating impacts given increasing energy affordability concerns. However, there are three significant challenges we currently face that are contributing more directly to increased utility bills. The need to upgrade our significantly aging energy infrastructure, invest in new transmission and distribution to meet growing electric demand, and build new generation. New York has a significant amount of utility infrastructure that is rapidly approaching or at the end of its useful life. The thousands of miles of aging utility poles, substations, and other equipment, plus investments to develop new and maintain existing generation, will require spending billions of dollars to ensure system reliability and increase resiliency. These costs are and will continue to impact utility rates, and unfortunately, the consequence of no action means jeopardizing the reliability and safety of our energy systems. I mention all of this because the Commission's primary responsibility is to maintain safe and adequate service at just and reasonable rates, and we take that responsibility of governance over the use of ratepayer funds extremely seriously. Although some clean energy programs were initiated before the CLCPA imposed statutory requirements and increased targets. This accelerated the implementation of policies and programs and set expectations with stakeholders of the need for significant amounts of increased funding to achieve the scale and timing of the law's objectives. While we remain committed to clean energy progress, we cannot jeopardize the ability for consumers to pay their bills, and will continue balancing energy affordability in our decisions. The New York Independent System Operator, or NYISO's short-term assessment of reliability STAR report this week identified reliability needs as early as next year in New York City and Long Island. While some investments are underway to address this near-term gap, the report highlights needs that require near-term interventions. The process doesn't mean the lights are going to go out next year. The NYISO planning processes are working as they should, but it does mean an out-of-market solution designed specifically to address these needs is likely. A solicitation by the NYISO for additional resources is forthcoming, and we will be closely watching these actions to ensure adequate supply and demand solutions come online in time to preserve reliability needs. The STAR report highlights a deeper structural reliability challenge. New York has some of the oldest generation in the country and has been retiring more generation than it has added to the grid since 2019, while also seeing significant unforeseen increased electric demand. As noted, this is coming at a time of significant inflation and supply chain issues impacting our ability to build new generation, and now unprecedented headwinds from our federal government. Governor Hochul and the Commission have recognized the inability of current procurement mechanisms and market mechanisms to bring the kind of power projects we need to fruition. That is why the Commission launched a holistic review of our solicitation practices earlier this year to ensure the cost-effective and efficient achievement of the state's clean energy ambitions. This review includes an evaluation of wholesale energy and capacity market design that may need to be modified to better align with clean energy procurement. The Commission will continue to work collaboratively with our partners in state government, including the legislature and stakeholders, in the same transparent way we have always done to guide our energy systems forward in the best interest of ratepayers. We will continue making carefully balanced decisions while staying true to our legal mandates. It is this type of strong leadership that New York needs to build a durable path to the clean energy transition. My hope is that discussions like today's will allow us to have a realistic conversation about the energy challenges that we face and recognize the only path forward is through thoughtful collaboration that preserves our ability to ensure the lights and heat stay on for New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Next up is Charles Emosian. I've never said that right, we'll see, from the New York Power Authority. Morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator Krueger and others for setting up this conversation today. My name is Charles Emosian, and I'm Senior Vice President of Communications and External Affairs for the New York Power Authority. This morning, I look forward to discussing with you the work of the Power Authority in supporting state goals and in our commitment to advancing a reliable, affordable, and clean energy economy, both now and for generations to follow. For senators and staff who are joining us this morning who may not be as familiar with our work, the Power Authority was founded in 1931 by then Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt to harness our state's resources for public good. Today, we are the largest state-owned public power producer in the nation. We own and operate 17 generating facilities, 1/3 of the state's high-voltage transmission lines, which total more than 1,500 miles of transmission across the state. More than 80% of the electricity NYPA generates comes from our clean hydropower assets upstate. Our reach extends to even more communities across the state and our work with more than 1,000 customers. Our statute makes clear we exist to bring public power to the public. So it makes sense that our largest customers are cities, municipal governments, state-owned facilities, and schools. We also support nonprofit organizations and businesses, including large load customers like Micron and GlobalFoundries. NYPA's low-cost power is an important economic driver for New York. Through our customer partnerships and economic development programs, we directly support 450,000 jobs and have spurred more than $55 billion in private capital investment, all while delivering low-cost hydropower is our calling card. We work with customers on their own decarbonization projects to increase energy efficiency and lower costs. Affordability for New Yorkers is built into our operations. We know that savings on electricity costs that we help our customers to realize can be reinvested in local communities, into capital improvements, and towards creating jobs that New Yorkers need right now. We appreciate that you have invited us here today to speak about the state's climate and energy goals. The 2023-2024 enacted state budget called upon the Power Authority to release a plan every 2 years detailing our strategy to develop solar, wind, energy storage, and other renewable technologies in New York. Consistent with this new statutory authority, the Power Authority created an entirely new business unit with operating structures to support it. We filled key staff roles. We made required regulatory filings. We secured important tax rulings, and then we began performing due diligence on our first tranche of projects. In January, following a dozen public hearings across the state, we finalized our first renewable strategic plan. In July, we rolled out an update to our strategic plan that highlights 7 gigawatts of potential clean energy generation project opportunities for the Power Authority to work on developing in collaboration with the private sector. We're now moving forward expeditiously with our renewables development. We've deeply appreciated hearing from so many of you in support of the latest update to our plan for solar, wind, and energy storage projects. At the same time, we've heard from communities that they are interested in exploring the role of nuclear as part of their energy future. Those calls to action led to New York State again activating the Power Authority to add to New York's clean energy capacity. In June, Governor Hochul directed us to develop at least 1 gigawatt of nuclear energy in upstate New York. So we're excited to be issuing 2 requests for information to communities and developers respectively in the coming weeks to better understand where and how advanced nuclear technologies might best fit into our energy mix. We've also been asked to deliver firm baseload power to protect ratepayers and ensure that the power stays on when it's not windy or sunny. Diversifying the grid through a mix of clean energy technologies also shields New Yorkers from long-term energy price volatility and reduces our reliance on fossil fuels. We understand that the future of our state, for our communities, for our businesses, for our schools, and for our homes, depends on a reliable, affordable, and sustainable electric grid. The Power Authority agrees with Governor Hochul that the best way to achieve those objectives moving forward requires us to continue to invest in maintaining and upgrading our robust hydropower and transmission assets, further building out renewables projects statewide, and adding nuclear capacity upstate in a community that truly wants it. I'm grateful for your time today and look forward to your questions. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Charles. And our next presenter is John Williams, Chief Policy Officer, New York State Energy Research and Development Agents Authority. We know them as NYSERDA. Good afternoon, morning, still morning. Well, we don't hear you.
Perhaps that works.
Okay, you're here.
There you go. Okay,
right.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you, Senator Krueger, and to all the senators for the opportunity to hold the discussion today. Very much looking forward to that. I just wanted to give a little bit of information on, where NYSERDA is at in terms of helping to expand the state's economy, improve our consumer energy affordability, all while we help to realize the environmental and climate goals of the state. So with the pending New York State Energy Plan, it remains clear that New York's energy system can be advanced in a logical and thoughtful manner, maintaining a primary commitment to system reliability, but also facilitating the development of markets for clean, efficient, renewable energy technology outcomes that consumers are actually seeking, and which also demonstrate the spectrum of the value that those energy solutions provide. Just to give one example of that spectrum, right? This is all in the substantial progress that has been made with solar energy development in New York. We have completed the installation of 6 gigawatts of solar, which is 1 year in advance of the CLCPA identified goal. We're well on our way to installing 10 gigawatts, with 7 gigawatts already installed and 3 gigawatts in development. The value of this solar installation rests in the avoidance of greenhouse gas and criteria pollutant emissions, as well as the reduction of the exposure of solar consumers to peak electricity prices, which moderate their electric bills. Perhaps little understood, however, is how this resource is reducing the cost of electricity for all New York consumers. So during the heat wave that we saw at the end of June, the use of distributed solar reduced the state peak load, with estimates ranging between 7 to 10% reduction. The effect of that reduction is that the stress to the broader electricity system was reduced during that peak time, supporting reliability and resilience of the system. But that peak reduction also had the effect of pulling down wholesale electricity prices. And during that one heat wave alone, All New York electricity consumers, not just the owners of that distributed solar, but all New York electricity consumers saved over $90 million in avoided electricity costs. This is also not to mention that solar is currently supporting over 15,000 jobs in New York based on the 2024 data in the Clean Energy Industry Report. So this is just one example of the spectrum of benefits that our energy policies and programs have brought about for New York. This success can be replicated for clean energy outcomes that we are pursuing, whether through energy efficiency and building decarbonization, land-based and offshore wind, energy storage, electric vehicles, as well as all the system improvements that are being advanced to support continued penetration of clean energy. And new energy options are becoming more visible each year, including the readiness level of several advanced nuclear technologies, which have the potential to provide amounts of energy that will allow New York to capitalize on the economic development opportunities that are simultaneously emerging with that new technology. The Draft State Energy Plan integrates the continued advancement of clean energy in the scenarios that have been made available for public review and comment. The draft plan scenarios found that even with a conservative view of our ability to deploy renewable generation, New York would still deploy 42 gigawatts of new renewables and 9 gigawatts of new battery storage by 2040, nearly tripling the amount of renewable energy generated in the state. This is a substantial transformation of our energy system. Unfortunately, it is not sufficient to achieve the zero-emission electricity system ambitions. The draft plan concluded that closing that remaining gap would require other resources to complement renewables, with nuclear being among the best and the most likely candidates to close that gap. Energy efficiency continues to serve as a major driver in our transportation and building sectors, with our electric vehicle and systems supports and the new all-electric construction codes. Scenarios in the draft plan forecast more than 5.5 million electric cars on the road by 2040, representing 60% of all vehicles that year, with substantial growth for medium and heavy-duty vehicles as well. It's also important to note that the importance of New York's commitments to energy efficiency and the impact they'll have on the energy system. For example, even as the residential sector adds 1.3 million new heat pumps by 2040, with growth in the commercial sector as well, the built environment does not increase electric loads through 2040. This is a direct result of the state's codes, investments in energy efficiency, and other policies. So it's important to note that the benefits help not just the person or business adopting the system, but again, as we make those types of investments, all electric consumers benefit by boosted reliability and reducing system costs. The draft plan acknowledges the current economic and political circumstances that are impacting our energy system, whether they be clean energy or even conventional energy options. Those headwinds, as they've been called, have been experienced over the past couple of years now, right? And New York's energy economy has been directly affected with impacts from the supply chain disruptions that are talked about, initiated by the pandemic, as well as an inflationary economy, which also has significant effect. And specifically for clean energy, week to week, we are seeing continued shifts in federal government policies, reversing or changing administrative actions, tax policies, and technology supports, all of which were designed for market development and growth of new technologies. One issue to keep in consideration is that our work on our state energy plan commenced last September, and the analytical approaches supporting that work were started in March. That was made prior to a lot of the changes that we've seen in the federal government. So we've looked to incorporate some of those shifts in our projections, and we've been realizing since the new administration came up into office, and we've got some sensitivities built into those projections. We are currently updating these analyses to better understand the impact on that analysis and the implications for our energy systems. We're looking to have that done prior to the planning board's consideration of the final plan. But despite these uncertainties in the current federal government, Governor Hochul, NYSERDA, my colleagues on this roundtable, and thank you for the acknowledgement, Senator Harckham, we are continuing the work, the public service work, working with stakeholders, also those in the private sector, to advance clean energy targets with the construction of the offshore wind projects, the clean energy transmission projects underway, and other projects. And all of this continues to move forward as we lay the groundwork for next steps in our program and the long-term resilience of New York-based energy industries. This includes taking steps to advance new technologies and innovation that we believe will augment the advancement of environmental and climate policies as we continue to see growth in the state's economy, and we ensure that we have necessary energy resources to meet that growth with the highest levels of reliability and affordability, which the state's energy system is really a model for. So I'll conclude there. Thank you again for conducting this discussion, and very happy to engage in that discussion.
Thank you, everyone. So again, now we're shifting to hopefully just a more open back and forth of questions and answers. And I'm going to allow Pete Harcum to start us off, and any of you can choose to answer. If you raise a hand, then one of us will notice and grab you. And as well, my colleagues from the Senate who have joined us today, please feel free to raise your hand when you would wish to ask a question. And it's designed to be a little more free flow, and we are going to put up a clock with the time frame for a specific subset of issues, because we worried, to be honest, if we didn't do it, we would never get off the first section. And obviously CLCPA is an enormously big bill with affecting so many different government functions. So again, we're going to break it out, starting with 30 minutes for affordability, 30 minutes for overall actions, 25 minutes for building decarb gas transition, 20 minutes for large-scale renewables and storage, 20 minutes for solar and storage, 20 minutes for transition. Obviously, then 10 minutes for offshore wind. And if there's additional time, we will see whether we get to the subset issues of data, transportation, nuclear power. And obviously, none of these are exactly completely independent of each other. So don't worry if you're trying to answer an affordability question, but you find yourself talking about how solar is so inexpensive, for example. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Pete. And usually our pattern, just for people to know, I think Pete takes the lead on the questions. I open it up to any other colleagues, and I like to back cleanup. That's sort of my style after 100 years in budget hearings. So I'm going to give it to our chair of the relevant committee, Pete Harcum.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and I think finance is very, very relevant to this as well. So as we look with a lens toward affordability, I first want to just summarize when we met with the NGOs, the two things that they said are the most powerful for affordability in New York are renewables and the Empower Plus program. And yet we in the state are cutting the allocation to New York Sun. And we're reducing the allocation to Empower Plus. So just want to put those on the board for comment. We know that 90% of the new generation in the world is renewable. When the state of Texas, after their blackout, all of their new generation has been renewable, saving their taxpayers $30 billion, their ratepayers $30 billion. It's the most scalable, it's the most cost-effective, and yet we hear issues from developers in New York on interconnection issues. We heard a speaker just before this panel talk about, for community solar, the loss of the performance-based credit causing a drop in community solar. We see the scary report from ISO, and yet they have 218 clean energy projects stuck in their queue. So it seems that while we're making, and John, thank you for talking about the progress that we have made in renewables, while the rest of the world seems to be surging ahead, we still seem to be having roadblocks. What can we do? Renewables obviously reduces greenhouse gases, but it's the most affordable form of energy. What can we be doing more of? Anybody?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Senator. I'll jump in first and then welcome the addition from my colleagues. I think there's a few things that we are doing. I think we recognize that we wish we had made more progress on the renewable front to date, but we certainly are committed. And NYSERDA recently released a new solicitation for land-based renewables. So we're forging ahead. There are certain, areas where we have roadblocks that are going to be very challenging to overcome. I know you mentioned a discussion on offshore winds later in the conversation, but certainly that's been one very significant roadblock, particularly for our downstate, clean energy objectives that's been thrown our way. But we are very, focused on making sure that we improve interconnection timeframes. There are a few things that have been done at the NYSO level, over the last several years, including significant improvements to their interconnection process to allow for annual studies versus, a queue where you had to wait potentially for years to be able to get your project studied. There's been some advancements there, but I would say that we have met with several of the industry representatives over the last, couple of years to think about what we can do more of on the interconnection front at the market level. On the utility level, for the last 5 years, we've implemented a number of improvements to streamline the utility side of interconnection, particularly on the distributed side. But we've also recognized where there are faults. And so we've done a couple of things there. We've taken swift action to implement new cost sharing rules so that the first developer in doesn't bear the full cost of the necessary infrastructure upgrade. That has significantly reduced the cost to individual developers and improved the process. We also have a proceeding open on interconnection timeliness and cost allocation methodologies, which seems complex, and it is, but it's really to solve the challenge from developers where I know NYSEA has raised this issue multiple times, where the cost is not consistent across utilities. And oftentimes a developer comes in, they get an interconnection agreement, and the utility comes back with, a higher cost. And so we are keenly focused on making sure that cost allocation for upgrades is fair and consistent, and taking into account petitions that have been filed by industry, as well as expert filings in our docket to make sure that we make those improvements and make sure that interconnection is fair and that we're improving the timeliness of bringing new resources online. So all of those things, I think we strongly agree need to be a focus for the state, and we're committed to doing it.
Thanks. John?
Yeah, thanks. Maybe just to add to that, one thing I think to keep in mind, and this is getting to the federal policy issues. The previous policies were really designed to try to help facilitate growth of various renewable technologies on a national scale. Right. And that meant that, we were looking at, what I would say are non-traditional renewable states as entering the market. That was going to, it was estimated that that would lead to cost reductions for the entire country with those technologies. So there was a lot of kind of organizing the industry around what those projections were going to look like. What we have seen with a reversal of a lot of that like incentive is, one, there's like a little bit of a time clock that we're working on right now. And, there are a bunch of projects that we are, have been in kind of New York State queues, whether at NYSERDA, whether at NYSO, whether, in varying stages of permitting, siting, and getting their financing pulled together. Those are the projects that are actually getting all the time and attention right now, because we need to maximize the amount of those projects that are going to be able to take advantage of kind of this very short window for those remaining kind of incentives. That, I think, will lead to, decisions on projects. It will lead to, kind of construction cycles then getting started. That actually just keeps the industry going. And we'll see the value of that. Hopefully, what that will then be able to lead is to continued levels of activity, What some of the reversal of the policies did was it didn't eliminate all kind of federal supports. It just brought it down to a level that the industry really understood, but really understood, I would say, in our pre-inflationary, pre-disrupted supply chain times. So what we're going to need to see, again, after this very near-term impact to the industry can get worked through and we understand what we have, we'll then need to understand, what the industry is seeing as kind of the long-term trajectory and how can they reorganize the financing of projects? What does that mean in terms of the availability of equipment and sites to be ready for new construction? So that's going to be something that we'll be looking at. That's a little bit what we're anticipating the current solicitation that NYSERDA's got on the street will be able to reveal. It's going to reveal like where the industry thinks that we'll be able to go kind of in this next era, and then what are the implications in terms of timeframes, cost structures, and et cetera. And we'll really want to be sure we've got our eyes wide open to that learning experience.
All right, thank you all. Liz, I think let's open to other members.
Absolutely. Anybody have their hand up? I'm looking, because if not, I'll just roll along till somebody does. Okay, again, for all of you, I want to go back to that question Pete asked about the 200 and how many projects are being held up in the NYSO pipeline?
It's 222 and 218 of them are renewable, I believe.
So I'd love to understand what's stopping them all. I'm assuming it's not one answer. It may not even be one agency. But when I read their report about the crisis about to occur because there isn't adequate energy heading forward for New York City, for example, and that any proposal other than sustainable has far longer timelines than we can deal with. So it's obvious to me we want to look hard at those projects that are already in your pipeline and try to figure out what we do as a state and, if necessary, a legislature to change the rules of the road so these can move forward as quickly as possible. So help me understand how we do that kind of evaluation, literally proposal by proposal.
Sure. Thank you, Senator. I'll jump in first, and I see another senator has your hand raised, so I'll be quick.
That's okay.
I think it's a few things. So, my colleague John was mentioning that we're taking a very detailed look at the current pipeline of renewable energy projects, specifically focusing on the large scale for a minute, because we were talking about the NYSO interconnection queue. We've went through, every single project that we're aware of, whether it's, pending before ORES for a permit, or maybe already has their permit, whether it's in the NYSO interconnection process, and or whether it has a NYSERDA contract under a previous solicitation. Each one of those projects has its own unique challenges. As you mentioned, interconnection is one of many things that impact the ability to build a project. Specifically, what we've seen over the last few years from the clean energy industry is massive shifts in the cost for equipment. So where a developer may have had a plan for how much it was going to cost their project to be developed, as they get further into the development cycle and try to secure those supply chain resources, they impact significant swings in what they otherwise thought they were going to have to pay to build a project. So that takes time for developers to think through, to make sure that their projects are financially viable and to make sure that they can continue. So that's one thing that's impacted them. I think the other, since 2020, the Office of Renewable Energy Siting has issued 27 permits. That's a significant amount of permits versus what we were previously issuing. So we've made a lot of progress in actually doing the detailed environmental site assessments with our colleagues at DEC and other agencies to get those projects permitted so that they have the approvals they need to build once they are able to build. And I think it's really important, the legislature's leadership over the last couple of years in advancing things like ORES, like the RAPID Act, that's caused us to, engage all stakeholders, including local governments, on the challenges that they see for permitting projects and try to strike the best balance that we can. We are seeing, you know, increased opposition to some projects. You know, I think we've hit what I would call a lot of the projects that, you know, maybe had better or broader community support. Now we're getting into details where we're the third or fourth project in a county and we're seeing some pushback. That doesn't necessarily mean that it impacts the permitting timeframe, but what we have done over the last year, which is why we're still in the Rapid Act rulemaking, is we went to every single region of the state, we listened to those communities, and we took a step back on our rulemaking, and we're going to issue revised rulemaking that takes that significant amount of community input into account. So it's a number of factors, as you said, but I think we're keenly focused on engaging with each individual developer, understanding why their project hasn't advanced to date. If it's interconnection, that's something that will go to our colleagues at the NYSO to try to address. But if it's funding or, you know, site assessment or some other thing that's impacting their project, every single one of us, you know, at our respective agencies plays a unique role, but we've been very committed to taking a look at our own regulations, at our own processes, and trying to make sure that we remove those barriers and get those projects built.
And just as a quick follow-up, so sometimes with my conversations with various stakeholders, they say it's the communities who don't want these projects and they're holding things up. But then we just had around the first hour we had with the local municipalities, and they're actually saying, no, actually, we need some help with this, but we understand why this is so important, particularly around affordability and access to our communities. So they were sort of saying the state's what's holding it up. So is there a way for us to, I don't know, another roundtable to just discuss what are the roadblocks and what can we do? Or do you think when you come out with your new regulations based on having some of these conversations, you're going to actually come up with specific recommendations that should speed this process along?
Sure. And I did listen to both roundtables, and particularly the last one from the municipalities. I think, you know, a lot of really good themes from that. I would say that those, you know, the people on the panel represented a diversity across the state, but they don't represent all of the state, right? So there are certain communities that may have different viewpoints with regards to renewable energy projects. And I would say that, you know, in the siting process, one of the primary things that we've seen as a concern is visual impacts. So a lot of communities all throughout the state, you know, want renewable energy in their communities, but when it comes time to site a project, they don't like where it's located or it's impacting community character. And so that has been a pretty common theme, especially in the last year of trying to site projects. But I think to your point, you know, what can we do in regulation? One of the things that the Rapid Act did was it strengthened what I would consider the pre-approval process. So that's been, you know, a process that ORES has done to try to make sure that when a project does come in for a permit, that there have been very specific requirements that the developer has met before they even come into the door into ORES. And those include very detailed consultations with municipalities, allowing those local governments to raise alternative routes, whether it's a transmission project or alternative locations. And so all of that feeds into the process that goes into ORES's decision-making. So, you know, we have done a lot of work over the last few years to try to address, at the core, ORES was meant to create streamlined permitting and to be able to, you know, look at local laws, and if there are any that are unreasonably burdensome in light of the CLCPA's goals, be able to kind of, you know, still address that, but move forward with a project. What we've tried to do is make sure that communities know that they still have a voice, that there are many opportunities to engage. And with our colleagues at NYSERDA in particular, NYSERDA has a very dedicated siting team that, in addition to ORES staff, is going out and engaging with local governments and trying to make sure that they understand the ORES process, they understand the opportunities for engagement, and that they can be partners to us. And then one additional thing I would note is that we also want those same local governments to have input into our planning processes. So through the coordinated grid planning process, through other processes where we're looking at transmission and generation build out, and in particular, clean energy zones that we're actively working on, we've met with many counties and local governments to hear what they think will work if we were to proactively use clean energy zones to target areas for development. So I think, a lot of my background is on working with local governments. I do think that they're an important voice. And so, we're very committed to making sure they have a seat at the table for all of our work.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Rachel May has her hand up.
I do, and I want to follow up on this thread because I've got 2 wind projects being proposed in my district that are meeting just really virulent opposition. But I also, in my previous district, had a wind farm that was extremely successful, and I'm wondering if you're looking at projects that haven't had all the pushback, that have been able to go off kind of without a hitch, and is there a way to steer the developers toward the kinds of projects where there's going to be less pushback? That would be really helpful. It is true. And the other thing is educating people, actually wind turbines aren't that ugly once you get used to them. So doing some kind of more charm offensive for some of these things that people just viscerally react to. But I also wanted to talk about the interconnection thing. I put in the chat a bill that we have. I know that in some states, they bring projects online kind of right away as soon as they can produce energy. And then if there isn't the total capacity at peak for all the projects that are online, they just, scale them back at the delivery end rather than at the connection end. And I'm wondering to what extent New York is doing that, and is something like my bill that's really just a study bill, but do we need that? Do we need something to really be figuring out how to do this more efficiently so that we can get as many projects online as possible and then deal with the problem of having too much energy at peak, which is a good problem I think we want to have.
Thank you, Senator. And sorry, John, I'll try to be quick. I want to make sure you get to jump in too. But specifically because we're talking about ORES and, what can we do to direct developers to communities that may have less opposition. I think the significant scale of increased siting of large-scale resources really, started only a few years ago, right? So we had a lot of developers that were trying to interconnect into the state, and we faced some challenges with that. We were able to see, what effective collaboration and development of a project looks like. We've taken those lessons learned and engaged with our developer community, both, through the department and ORES, as well as NYSERDA and other agencies, to make sure that they understand what the main concerns are by communities, and also hold them accountable to make sure that at the end of the day, they are responsible for doing outreach with the local communities where they're trying to site a project. We play a role as well, but they're the ones that are the developers, right? So we've made sure that we've kind of incorporated those lessons learned along the way. I think the other thing to keep in mind is, we're trying to integrate a massive amount of generation. And one of the roadblocks over the last several years has been capacity to interconnect. And so there were pockets across the state where we had significant amounts of capacity, and developers were targeting them because it was easy to interconnect a project there. What that meant was that there was multiple projects that were trying to locate in the same area, and that puts pressure on the local community who, maybe already has 2 solar projects in their district that are utility scale and have concerns about the continued siting of big resources. And one of the ways that we've addressed that is we've heard them, and we've said, pursuant to the legislature's enactment of the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth and Community Benefits Act, we instituted the coordinated grid planning process to serve as this one platform where anybody can go and understand how we're actually planning for the transmission and distribution system, and make sure that we're developing projects to unlock capacity in other regions of the state. Over the last couple of years, we've instituted a couple major project work streams associated with that same law, the phase 1 and phase 2 CLCPA transmission projects. And in that vein, I think it's over $5 billion of projects just between those 2 handfuls to massively increase the amount of areas where developers can interconnect their resources and avoid curtailment. And then I'll say one more thing, and I want to make sure John can jump in as well. On the bill that you referenced, flexible interconnection, or that theme that developers are very interested in New York, We've heard specifically on the distributed side, a lot of interest from, NYSEA and other developers. And one of the things that we have to balance is we want to make sure that if a resource is coming to the grid, that it's delivering its value. So it's a careful balance to allow for some projects to early interconnect and make sure that we're getting the value out of that resource that we're paying for. And so we've had a number of conversations with the developer community within our, interconnection proceeding, if you will, to see what opportunities we have to mitigate against that risk, but also address their, innovative idea to have some faster interconnection process while we wait for the capacity upgrades to come online. So I think it's a very innovative concept, and I'm, very interested in doing that. And then National Grid actually has a pilot right now with NYSEA to test this concept in its service territory, which is great.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and maybe just quick, because I do see Senator Hinchy with questions. Two things, Senator May, that you mentioned. On the first one, about kind of what happens at the community, I think the thing that we need to understand, like sometimes, and this is getting to like, why was it popular here, not popular there? There's, an immediacy that happens with the community, like kind of just honing in on the project that's in front of folks. And, folks just don't always understand and need to appreciate like what the value that those resources can bring to the community. Jessica mentioned NYSERDA's siting team, and that's exactly what they do. I'm not going to label it as necessarily the charm offensive, but what it is really looking to do is educate the local community, and whether it is the local municipal government structures, whether it's the community and the residents themselves, I think there is a need for, ensuring that there's a continuous dialogue that happens, and that's what the siting team is looking to make sure to put in place. I think what is oftentimes helpful is actually trying to make connections between maybe the reluctant community and the very supportive community with positive experience, and making sure that, it's the peer-to-peer kind of conversations that happen, and not necessarily just the state coming in and, telling folks like how things are going to play out. So there is, a need for education. There is a need for dialogue that does sometimes take time. But there are ways that we can facilitate how that exchange happens. The other thing just to keep in mind as well, and this gets a little bit to the interconnection issue, and Jessica mentioned this a bit. The issue sometimes happens that we have to account for that, not all of the renewable resources are at an equivalent level in all areas of the state. So where you have more wind, where you have more recoverable solar, developers are naturally going to gravitate to those areas. And because they will make for, better development, they'll make for more energy outputs. There's a lot of reasons why we would actually want to see additional development happening there. The grid, which has been designed and built out, over decades, maybe was not being designed at the time when those resources were what the energy industries were really trying to capture. So, just mentioned, we have to understand, like, what are the system upgrades? That's part of the NYSO system study process, that, when you start bringing in new resources, what's that going to actually do to the grid? Both in terms of like not wanting to overload the grid, but also wanting to make sure we're not bottling up the energy that's coming out of those new systems. Like, we don't want to see big investments in systems where, at points in time, that the energy just needs to be curtailed, right? Like that's not a great outcome for anybody. We want to see as much of that energy getting into the system as possible. So there is a lot of, design that needs to happen, and a lot of back and forth that needs to happen to make sure we're getting, as much of the resource built in a timely fashion and in as, in as reasonable a way, or in as understood a way, to make sure the system is able to accommodate it, and we're able to like actually utilize all that energy as well. So it's complex. I can't deny that, and we just need to continue to work on what the solutions might be.
Thank you. All right, Michelle, did you have other questions, or are you satisfied here?
I have not asked a question.
Sorry, I got lost in the way I I thought you asked the last question. I'm so sorry. Michelle.
That's okay. No, that was still on Senator May's question, which was very robust. So thank you. Keeping it on citing, I think, adjacent to this discussion, and we will definitely run out of time, so maybe people can follow up with me. One of the challenges I think that we see is that, and this is, I think, kind of baked into the CLCPA, but is that the developers are really driving the siting locations, right? Developers are the ones who are out there finding the locations in which they want to try to then go forward through the process to site their whatever type of project it is. In this case, I'll use solar. And oftentimes, it's really rural areas with open land, beautiful view sheds, and farmland, which are the places that are the cheapest to site that solar energy. And when it's driven by the developer, they're going to try to find the cheapest location. And so I think it's really important that we kind of understand that it's not out of the goodness of their hearts that they're finding these locations. It's driven by profit. It also the state saying we want to do this, but it is driven by a profit margin. And so we, I think, as the state, have a responsibility to also help find the best locations to site these projects, because in my understanding, that will help also alleviate the bottlenecks when developers are trying to site in locations that have many challenges, whether it's wetlands or prime soil or community pushback, whatever it is. There's a role here that I haven't totally seen, and I would love some information on how the state, or if you all feel your agencies can even help find some of these sites outside of the big, the build ready programs. I'm not talking, I know what exists. Like, how are our agencies helping find locations or incentivize on things like big warehouses, massive parking lots? When we do deals with ESD and we're giving state money, what are we also requiring as it pertains to renewable energy and solar on those big parking lots? Maybe like a Micron. How are all of you in this process helping fill those gaps, leading on that conversation, and what can we be doing to make that easier for you?
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in first, Senator. There's a lot to that. I will say, when we think about, particularly like, let's take rural areas first, right? So we do have our technical working group that is looking to make sure that as we think of development in rural areas, a lot of those items that you put on the table, prime soils, what might already be existing in a community, all of those are being accounted for when we think about what is kind of the next stage of development there. The other thing I would say, and it's almost as if you're, when we think about, what does solar siting in the built environment look like, right? More rooftops, more parking lots. How do we facilitate that kind of construct, like a tie it to economic development outcomes? I think though, the one thing that we're also looking at in rural areas are like, what are the co-uses that can happen if you do say have a solar development in previously farmland? And can there be actually some additional farming activity that happens as a result? And sometimes like those solar developments, they actually keep the more profitable part of the farm in operation, even so, which the farmer then
Still, John, just because
utilizes.
we are such limited time here, like I could talk agrivoltaics with you all day, and I think many people on this call can too. That's not what I'm talking about, right? Like, we're not talking about sheep grazing. We're talking about real agrivoltaics. That's on a path. We need to do more of that. Really appreciate it. Really smart solar development. Not everything is just farmland, though, right? And so as we're talking about, as you just said, incentivizing in more of the built up areas on rooftops, why are we not doing that in rural areas also? We have major distribution centers, Dollar General, major distribution warehouses, Amazon, major distribution warehouses, Target, major distribution warehouses, to name just three. That is also rural development. And so why I haven't seen any movement from really any of our agencies talking about that as a component. It's always, how can we do co-use on farmland? That can't be the only answer here. So what else can we do to help you shift this conversation away from where we've been and to a broader, more strategic and thoughtful plan so we can actually hit our goals and do it quickly?
And I'm sorry, I'm just going to jump in to point out, even though we called this section affordability, we're mostly talking about storage and large-scale renewables. So, which is great. So I'm thinking we actually can have more time for affordability, because I have a list of questions on affordability we didn't even get to yet. So keep going and answer Michelle's questions. But
Take
then,
this time off of the other section.
but then we're going to continue affordability before we jump, because I think we won't necessarily need another 20 minutes on distributed solar and storage. That was later on in the schedule. Is that okay with everyone? Okay, great. So now whoever was going to answer Michelle's follow-up question.
I can jump in first for
Okay.
from DEC's perspective. Senator, I think we're thinking actually like you are as well. I think there needs to be a more strategic view at this on how are you finding the right areas for development writ large. I mean, we just announced at DEC under Commissioner Lefton, we created a whole new deputy commissioner for sustainable development with exactly the way you're thinking in mind. And we brought the regions, which have so much of our day-to-day work on these type of projects, together with our Division of Environmental Permits, to try to, in a way, be part of that solution of how are we helping to identify areas that, I mean, from my vantage point, have the least environmental impacts, because that's a win for me from the department, right? So I don't have the perfect answer for you yet, but this is something that we're really prioritizing right now, and I expect more conversations in the coming months as we go into session will occur.
Wonderful. I want to hear from Jessica, but I'd be curious too if you see within the law or subsequent other laws reasons why you may have challenges with that, right? Because I think what we've heard to date over the last few years that we've been trying to talk about this angle is, well, no, the CLCPA really gives it up to the developers, and the developers are the ones who find it. But that's not that's not working in the way that we need it to, for all the reasons, right? And so is there something that's blocking the ability to be more thoughtful, or have the state have a more direct role in shifting some of that thinking or finding other sites? Is it that there's tax credits that are needed? Like, what are the things that we can be doing? I've got some bills on it, but like, I think I would love to hear from you guys what it is. Are there hurdles that stop it from happening? And is it just that we're not having that conversation, or are there actual problems that are holding it up?
Yeah, I'd be interested to what my other colleagues jump in there too. I think generally from my department's perspective, look, what I can provide as a regulator is, and what we're striving to do is provide consistency and certainty as we're looking at permitting decisions, right? That is our job, and something that we are striving to improve constantly, right? Of course, once you're moving through permits, we cannot provide any assurances, right? But we can help provide clarity on process to ensure that the rules of the road are really clear. And we're striving to improve that in this process. And I think that naturally there's ways that we could strategically look at, I don't know, maybe programs like a brownfield program that already is looking at sites that are redo. Maybe there's ways to marry some of this, and more discussion to have on that. And I would love to follow up to see kind of more creatively what you're thinking about.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Okay, then I'm gonna.
Sorry.
Oh, go. Sorry. Who else?
Please hear from Jessica, because I'm curious at the
I'm
PSC.
so sorry. Of course, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, senators. So a couple things in response. I think, first, your point on rooftops and parking lots is a good one. And we certainly don't disagree that that's something that should be a primary focus. But we also need significant scale of resources. And so one of the things that we're doing in response to your comments here, as well as what we've heard from stakeholders over the last couple of years, particularly local governments, as well as the agriculture industry and others, is that we need to have a better process of doing two things. One, building more transmission in other areas of the state so that developers have more choice about where they locate resources. And to John's point, making sure that we're aligning the development of that transmission system with where the resources are going to provide the most value to the grid and for the money that we're spending on them. So that's one thing that we're doing through coordinated grid planning process. I mentioned clean energy zones, and that's something that's well underway, and we've taken in a bunch of, we've had meetings with counties throughout the state that have approached us, or that the industry has connected us with, that are very interested in being host communities. And so it's a very powerful thing that we're excited to be, advancing, and we're taking in a lot of feedback right now. We'd be happy to have follow-up conversations with you and other senators. But one of the things that we need is willing landowners, right? So part of the clean energy zone concept is to get feedback from communities throughout the state about areas that could be primed for development, where there's a matching of both available land and willing landowners, as well as, ripe, areas for development of these resources. So everything's a balance. And I think, to your point, we've had, years of developer-driven, project development, which has provided value to the grid, but it's also caused, some tension points that we want to make sure that we're addressing. So definitely interested in follow-up conversations, and thank you.
Yeah, I would love to talk with you about that. I think it's landowners, but it's also businesses, right? Like we have to be talking to our businesses, like the large distribution warehouses, or when we are doing deals, talk about interconnection of agencies. When ESD is doing a deal and we're giving a company millions, sometimes billions of dollars, how are we not working with them to make sure that the Bills Stadium parking lot is blanketed with solar, right? Or that Micron, and maybe this is part of that deal, and Senator May would know more than me, but I don't think so. Why are they not running, and not just to power their own business, but for the community and for the grid at large? That feels like major missed opportunities for us at the state, and also like the right hand's not talking to the left hand when we're trying to, we're investing money in growing businesses, but then we're also talking how we don't have enough money for renewable energy, and if we have more businesses, we need more power we need more power on the grid, but we're not actually we have to all be working together, and it can't just be rural communities equal 300 acres of farmland. It has to be way more broad than that and strategic. And so I implore all of us to think about that, and would love to follow up with all of you separately to, figure out how we can move forward. Thank you.
Let me quickly second that. Micron is going to have 1,400 acres for its campus, and it's going to be drawing a huge amount of energy off the grid. And it's just kind of absurd that there isn't any plan for production of energy on that space. Yeah.
I'll jump in quickly to both senators. I think you both raised really good points, and a couple of things. Our colleagues at ESD are not here today, but what I can tell you is that they do a lot in reaching out to us to try to think about ways to marry both economic development programs as well as the state's clean energy agenda. The Green Chips program and other efforts that are underway are just one of many examples where we're trying to advance both things in parallel. The Power Up program, where we're partnering with ESD to really think about decreased costs of utility interconnection. We're also, encouraging these businesses, as we have for many years, to adopt clean energy solutions. There's a balance there. I think we can provide incentives and other resources to encourage businesses to move that way, and that has definitely been a focus of the states for many years. But I think, to the extent that there are areas for improvement or other things that we should think about, we're open to that.
Yeah. I think if we're giving lots of money, and then I'll end it here, but if we are giving lots of money to do it, it's great that they're reaching out to you and talking about it, but the fact that we don't have siting on these locations as a requirement of the deals it seems like we are doing ourselves a disservice and New Yorkers a disservice, including from an affordability perspective, and from a long-term climate perspective, if that's not front and center in some of these conversations. So would love to hear more about how we think about moving that forward.
And I'm gonna try to jump us off of solar siting for a minute into some of the other affordability questions, because I can guarantee every government person on this call Zoom that all electeds hear from their constituents how their utility rates keep skyrocketing, are becoming completely unaffordable. We've got, I think, the largest number of New Yorkers in debt to their utility companies, either at risk of having their power shut off or actually having their power shut off. And we need to confront this. And I think that the answer longer term is, sustainable green utilities are actually much less expensive per kilowatt hour, but we have just a broken system, it seems. So I guess this is mostly a PSC question, but shouldn't we be changing the rules of the road of what costs are allowed to be factored into ratepayer proposals? for example, I know this came up at the Joint Senate Corporations hearing on September 30th. Why are we letting utility companies include their lobbying costs, their public relations costs, their travel for executives and board members, and sometimes their exorbitant salaries into the ratepayer calculations? Is that really fair? So I'm going to start with changing the rules of the road on how we calculate any given utilities rate increase costs.
I expected a lot of these questions today, Senator, so thank you for asking. I'm a ratepayer. All of us on this call are. And what I can tell you just initially is there's, 550 plus staff at the department who care very, very much so about the increasing costs that we're seeing in utility rates. The work that we do in rate cases is not for everyone. It's very, very tough, but everybody has the opportunity to participate. And so one of the things that I think is a very powerful tool is what we're seeing in participation in our rate cases. Over the last few years, we've seen a very significant increase to the amount of people that are participating, and we need that. And we encourage them to participate in any way that they can, whether it's very detailed technical, testimony, or whether it's just filing a comment about the things that are concerning them. And then we have judges and other staff that go through every single comment, and we incorporate that into the ultimate decision. But specifically about the components and rates, I think there are dozens of components that go into rate cases. Take one category, such as information technology, and you could have almost 100 different components that fit into that one line item of a utility rate increase. And every single one of them is something that we have to heavily scrutinize. That requires expertise, and it requires a lot of the ability to provide evidence about why that expense is not justified or shouldn't be included in the ultimate rate case, right? And so there are some components that we have more control over and some that we do not. And when we refer to certain expenses like property taxes or storm costs or unavoidable capital investment in aging infrastructure, those are things that are hard to knock down. Specifically property taxes, we can't control that. That's a pass-through to the ratepayers. And I think our recent report highlighted that across New York State, between 12 and 25% of a customer's bill is just property taxes. So that's one component we can't change, but the rest of it we can. And so regarding lobbying, New York utilities are not permitted to use ratepayer funds for legislative lobbying activity. And we've made sure that when folks have flagged any concern about a utility potentially doing that, we've investigated them. And if we were to find, an issue with a utility, we would penalize them for that and return whatever the cost is back to ratepayers. They can't pay memberships for trade associations that may lobby on their behalf. And we use all of the powers, including our investigations and enforcement powers at the commission to hold utilities accountable and limit any activity that would be improper. But certainly any further restrictions or any other discussions that we want to have on that point about, potential expenses that we're seeing in rates or things that should be modified, the commission and, the staff at the department are very open to those conversations.
Great. And I just put in a bill that would put new requirements on cryptocurrency mining and increase their costs because they're eating up so much energy. And in doing some of the research for that bill, and somebody will type the bill number into chat, I can't have the exact moment, we realize they're paying lower kilowatt hour costs than almost anyone in the state. And a lot of this is happening up in Rachel May's territory because they're also draining water out of her beautiful Great Lake and boiling it, which has its own problems. And I don't even understand the concept that you can be truly an energy guzzler paying much lower rates, and in some cases cryptocurrency not even producing anything real for all of this. And why don't we make them pay more because we're paying it because they're not paying it? So is there some way to deal with a strategy? I know it's been talked about in the context of Micron and AI and all the demand and energy they are going to want. but they shouldn't be getting discounts. They're getting all kinds of subsidies. Even crypto turns out to be getting tax subsidies. This is sort of crazy. These are actually the entities that if they're going to use up whole cities worth of energy, they should be paying higher rates for their utilities so that we don't pay them. And some of them I don't think should exist at all. So I'm curious whether you've all had conversations like that for affordability.
Yeah, Senator Krueger, that is a very good point, and I would say a couple things. First, Senator May, I would welcome a follow-up conversation about the specific facility that we're talking about here, just to see what their location is, the utility, and what rates they're paying. So I definitely think that's worthy of a follow-up. Back in, I think it was 2020, or anyways, between the passage of the Climate Act and today, we actually approved through the commission for 2 different municipal utilities the ability for that utility to charge higher rates for cryptocurrency facilities in their territory. So we have precedent where we've actually recognized the fact that these large users are, as you said, draining large amounts of power, and arguably, folks have a view that they're not providing value. And so we recognize that and we acknowledge it, and we said, okay, we're going to put new rates in place and allow you to charge them more for the services that are being provided. So I think we're open to having conversations on that point. And when it comes to large users such as data centers, we've been following actions in other states and had conversations with our colleagues in other commission jurisdictions about things like different demand structure designs where data centers or other large users are asked to pay a higher cost for the demand that they're pulling from the grid. So that alleviates the cost to all other ratepayers. That's one potential thing. There's also been some actions where if a large user is connecting to the grid, such as a data center, that there's an agreement between that facility and the state to stay in operation for a certain period of time so that whatever investments have been made are not wasted to serve that facility and end up benefiting all other consumers. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do, and every state across the country is grappling with the same issues that we are in New York State. So I think we have some lessons that we can learn from our partners, as well as lessons learned from the past about how we've addressed these issues. And I think, those are all great topics of conversation that we would welcome the opportunity to dive into details further with you.
So I'll just make an editorial comment. None of you have to respond. If cryptocurrency all leaves New York, I don't care. We shouldn't be paying for that energy at all or letting them use it. It doesn't even produce anything useful, and there's no jobs. 2, I would actually make the same argument for AI, although the governor would probably have a heart attack that I said that, because again, it doesn't create many jobs. It uses up mind-boggling amounts of energy. And the truth is, somebody's going to do AI sites somewhere. And when they produce AI, hopefully it won't be the Terminator 3 movie version, but actually helping mankind move forward version. But we're going to get that info anyway. We don't actually need to be the site of where AI plants are being built, taking up enormous amounts of our land. And yes, they build buildings there, but then there's almost no one who works there. So that's my point, that we could save ourselves an enormous amount of money and save our energy for the priority uses of people who live and work here if we just sort of took those 2 off the table. But that's an editorial comment. But going back to what we can be doing now, we were all in a panic over the federal cuts, obviously the HEAP program cuts, but there's really important projects that we're not necessarily funding, some using HEAP money, like the hair heating equipment repair and replacement program, the Clean and Tune program. I think we touched base a little earlier on the REACH program, and the fact that if we don't actually invest in these assorted projects that help update our older buildings, our low-income community buildings, multi-dwelling buildings, including a program the Senate's been pushing hard on, the GAP program, that will allow buildings to be repaired to the standards they need to move off of oil and gas into sustainable. Like, can we be doing something more there because we're really cutting off our opportunities for our communities, particularly those with older housing, communities where they're building still with low-income people who can't possibly absorb these costs themselves. You know, we're cutting off our nose to spite our face when we're not making those kinds of investments. So any of your departments for this?
Sure, I'll jump in first and then want to make sure I leave time for my colleagues. When it comes to gaps that heat funding cuts are going to place on the Heating Equipment Repair and Replacement Program, or HERP program, and Clean and Tune, we understand that OTDA, one of our sister agencies that's responsible for the funding there, is working on ways to address emergency no heats through temporary assistance programs, and that additional information on that will be available soon. Reductions in funding for heat, for weatherization and emergency replacement projects means that there will be more pressure to support New Yorkers through other existing programs like Empower Plus. And, you know, that's where the majority of energy efficiency programs for low-income customers are being implemented. And I think, you know, a couple things to say on the Empower Plus program, but that program certainly remains a priority for Governor Hochul and for us all as part of our affordability agenda, and really our efforts to make sure that we're reducing costs, especially to low-income households, to be able to pay for their utility bills. That program, combined with programs like energy affordability policy and, you know, the energy affordability guarantee, which the legislature has provided funding to help us support, are all powerful tools. But I think, you know, one thing that I just want to highlight is we recognize, based on stakeholder feedback in the Commission's energy efficiency and building electrification orders earlier this year, that there was a very strong desire to have more funding for low-income consumers. Historically, we had been providing about 20% of the previous Clean Energy Fund's budget to low-income consumers. We increased it to 30%. And we actually increased the amount of funding on an annual basis for low-income consumers by $132 million a year, which is an increase specifically to Empower of $50 million a year. So we did have a budget-bounded approach. We obviously want to make sure that we're protecting the impact to rates. But in that process, we heard from every single, you know, stakeholder, specifically those that represent low income, and we made changes to the program to make sure that we increase benefits. So we've taken a step historically to increase funding. We hope that that helps to fill some of the gap that we're going to see in funding from the feds. But certainly, you know, every funding cut that we see from the federal government does have an impact on our ability to deliver an equivalent amount of services to New Yorkers.
Okay, we're going to give the last word or question to Rachel May. And then for those of you with a scorecard, we're actually going to close down our affordability and our distributed solar storage sections and move on to overall actions for 30 minutes. Go, Rachel May.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Liz, for bringing up the crypto and data center issue, because they do like drive up the need for more energy. And I'm concerned if they're getting lower rates than, say, residential customers are. I wanted to bring this around to an issue that came up in a hearing on the NYSEG rates that I attended, which I felt like there was a thread in most people's comments that they weren't quite articulating in this way, but this is what I felt they were saying, was that they had no agency in trying to bring their bills down. So, you know, the delivery charges are there, and they go up. Even if you put solar panels on your house, or you super insulate your house, or you keep your heat at 59 degrees or whatever it is, your costs still go up. And it felt to me like it was really important that we figure out ways that there's a feedback loop that helps people, that incentivizes people to actually reduce their energy use by having them pay less. And I don't know if that's even possible. I get it. There's, you know, there are massive infrastructure costs and stuff, but it's not typically residential customers who are driving the need for additional capacity. And so if there's a way we can figure out to, you know, weight the cost to the organizations or people or activities that are actually driving up the need for more capacity, that would be the only fair thing to do, I think.
Yeah, Senator, you raised a couple of good points that I want to address. First, one of the things that we've tried to do better at, including, providing information to clean energy hubs and other organizations that are out there having conversations with communities, is to explain that there are two portions of your bill, the delivery portion and supply. And the supply portion is tied to your usage. And you have a lot of control as an individual consumer about how much energy you use, accessing available programs to reduce your energy costs. And those are all things that NYSERDA specifically, as well as the utilities through rebate programs, have been doing a lot of work to make sure that consumers know that they have choices when it comes to their supply. When it comes to delivery, those are costs that are the cost for the poles and wires and pipes and other things that serve businesses and homes throughout the state. And in our rate design, we are proud of the way that we've designed rates to make sure that each customer class is charged their the cost that it is to serve those customers. And so we have for years continuously reviewed the way that our rates are structured, taken in comments from stakeholders about things like alternative rate structures for customers that adopt electric vehicles. We've implemented tools for them so that if you do make choices for clean energy solutions, you can actually save additional money by signing up for a rate that gives you that benefit of the choices that you've made. So I think there's a lot more work that we can do there, and certainly we're having conversations with stakeholders about continuously refining our rate structures, but we do design them in a way that's equitable to the consumer. And then another thing on large loads or other consumers that are adding additional demand to the grid, I think it's important to note that those customers, whether it's an affordable housing project or a data center or a micron or other types of facilities, when they want to interconnect to the grid, they're charged almost the entire cost of interconnecting to the grid. The majority of those costs for infrastructure investments are borne entirely by that consumer by design. And it's a principle that we at the Commission, as well as other states across the country, call cost causation. So if you're the cost causer and you trigger an upgrade, you pay for that upgrade. And so I think, we're also having a lot more conversations about ways to continuously improve our interconnection policies, but certainly we're making sure that the people that are causing new demand to the grid and new costs are bearing that cost. And I think we're definitely interested in having more conversations with all of you, again, about large users, but I think just important to think about, we want to support affordable housing projects, and we want to make sure that it's not so costly for that one project to get built that it hinders their ability to do so. So I think everything's a balance, and we're certainly evaluating that here.
Thank you. And let me just say, I had the opportunity to go with the Climate Jobs Institute from Cornell out to Vancouver this summer and tour some district energy projects and mass timber projects, but the district energy ones in particular, where they were using the heat from wastewater to heat and cool whole areas outside of the city of Vancouver or inside the city, like bunches of apartment buildings and grocery stores and things that were getting all of their heating and cooling from wastewater. And it was a big upfront cost to do the infrastructure, but then it guaranteed people a very stable cost of energy over years and years and years. And I'm wondering what we're doing to incentivize that kind of thing in New York State.
All right, can I just wade in?
Go
We are
ahead.
way over time here. So if you could give like a 30-second answer, and then we need to move on to our next section. Sorry, Rachel.
Right, Barry.
30 seconds. So, Senator, I think you raise a really good point, and through the Utility Thermal Energy Network proceeding, which I think will also be a topic of discussion today, we are very focused on innovative ways to capture things like waste heat, or make sure that we're more effectively analyzing the role that utility thermal energy networks or thermal energy networks that aren't even owned by utilities can play, both in decarbonizing our grid, as well as making sure that we're providing clean alternatives to consumers. So we're very interested in that, and great point.
I might steal 10 seconds, Senator. But, you know, I think the thing to know, Senator May, I mean, like, we've got a lot of this activity going on. You know, NYSERDA has one program. We've got over 100 kind of planning and engineering studies getting exactly to the types of systems that you're talking about. So it is not without, you know, due attention that, you know, we are looking for those solutions. There actually is a lot of activity that's going on. And there's one thing going on with the utilities, and then I think there's another set of activities where people are really trying to appreciate and understand what their opportunity space is. So there's a lot of learning that needs to happen at the same time. So a lot of that work is underway.
I'm muted. Sorry about that. Thank you, everyone. That was a great panel. As Liz said, we could talk about many of those topics for hours and hours, but we need to move on. So this next section for 30 minutes is called Overall Actions, specific to the agencies. I have two specific questions. I think they're fairly brief, and then we'll turn over to colleagues. The CLCPA specifically targets every agency in New York State government that they need to build both environmental justice and climate into everything they do and all of their regulations. There have been a couple studies done by some advocacy groups over the last 2 years that showed this is not really happening across all state agencies. I mean, obviously you are because that's what you do, but many, many others are not. Who in state government is tasked with overseeing compliance with this, and what's being done to ensure that all state agencies are incorporating the spirit and the letter of the CLCPA into everything they do?
I can jump in.
Ed, Michelle.
Yeah, why don't you go first, Michelle?
Thanks, Jess. Senator, we just all have so much we want to say on this topic. Thank you for the question. Taking a step back, I think it goes without saying that, you know, the Department of Environmental Conservation, and I dare say for my agencies here, how much we value ensuring that we're really wrapping in the goals of environmental justice and ensuring that we're doing everything we can to reduce emissions in those overburdened communities across our programs. And so here at the department, that remains the top priority that we're looking across the programs, of course, meeting the requirements within the law to ensure that we are at minimum hitting that 35% target, but striving for the 40% across the board. And of course, we have other legislation that help guides our work here at the department, like the EJ siting law, which is really nation leading in guiding how we are making decisions within environmental justice communities. I think I would dare say that we need to talk to all the other agencies, right? And I would encourage the senators here to ensure that they're having those discussions. I think we at DEC are always here to provide guidance and assistance, especially if they are abiding by any of our regulatory requirements, and ensure that the state agencies have those resources to do so. But of course, all agencies have their obligations to meet the requirements of the law.
Yeah, I'll be very quick just to add to that. Thanks, Michelle. You know, as you mentioned, we're the agencies that are really leading the implementation of the CLCPA, but there are many projects that come before, for example, the commission for siting purposes. And on those projects, it really is several different agencies that are not here today that contribute to the evaluation of whether or not that project is going to have, you know, a disproportionate burden on a disadvantaged community or, you know, interfere with the ability to attain the state's emissions goals. So I think, you know, there is a lot of collaboration that I don't think people often realize, but I can tell you that all of our sister agencies understand, you know, that they need to meet the objectives of the law. I think, you know, as Michelle said, you know, her agency as well as ours and others have put out some resources and also been able to point to, hey, you know, if you have a project in front of you that involves X, Y, Z, take a look at the way that we evaluated Section 7 compliance, you know, so that way you have a sense of what we have done and how we're approaching it. So we've shared a lot of lessons learned. I also would say that the governor recognized the need to have leadership and consistency across agencies, and a few years ago issued Executive Order 22 that includes requirements for all state agencies to meet energy targets and other requirements to achieve the law's objectives. And that, you know, working group, if you will, is made up of representatives across virtually every state agency, as well as, SUNY and, other campuses that are trying to figure out how to meet CLCPA objectives. And so I think, there's a lot of collaboration that I don't think always makes, the news, so to speak, but it's there. And I think all of our agencies are very strongly committed.
Yeah, I could just jump in and add.
Go ahead.
Yeah, from NYPA's perspective, we are engaged in a lot of those conversations with our sister agencies. One of the pillars of the orders is Build Smart program. We have been able to work through with our state agencies on projects that we've initiated or projects that they've brought to our attention. We sometimes work with third-party developers. We've been able to provide access to the New York Energy Manager, which is a tool for tracking energy data across state facilities. And then our own teams will also work very closely with some of our key sister agencies like SUNY, for example, to do master planning, to support demand response. We support LED retrofits. We'll do sub-metering. So, I think as Jess said, there's a lot of activity happening across the state, and we're pretty frequently in conversation with each other.
I might just add to that, and I think it's kind of getting alluded to as well, actions that are happening at different agencies, just might look a little bit different, just given the nature of the work that different agencies do. I know for us, like we have a very kind of public facing need, particularly with all of the different programs that we're putting in place. So what we've actually needed to do is figure out like, how do we get to that kind of program design and program implementation process and look at all of the procedures and the steps and understand like how we've got an integration of the considerations of looking at, what might benefit a disadvantaged community, what might be able to be utilized in this solicitation to help facilitate project formation happening in disadvantaged communities. So and we have a team that's internal into NYSERDA that actually helps with the other program teams figure out like how do you integrate that, and part of our internal process requires that you have that collaboration happening. I think secondarily, we also need to make sure we've got the appropriate input strands coming in as well. So we have organized what is called our Energy Collaborative, and that is an organization of community-based organizations around the state that actually provide direct input to the thought and to NYSERDA's thought process as we're thinking about kind of what next iterations of programs are, where are there gaps in current programs, and how can we resolve those. So from that NYSERDA perspective, we need to make sure we're taking those types of actions that are actually making sure that the work that we're doing and the services that we're providing are well informed and are actually meeting the needs that we're hearing. I think with other agencies, it may look a little bit different, it might sound a little bit different, but I think different agencies are trying to learn from each other and think about like what a best practice as applied to that agency might look like.
All right, thank you all. I am over time. So either Senator May, Senator Hinchey, Senator Gunardis, questions? Senator Krueger.
Okay. First off, again, thank you so much. And this is all so complicated. So I had to run away for 2 minutes. So did Pete ask you about CLCPA yet? He did. Okay.
Yep.
And did you give an answer on a timeline?
Oh, no, Liz, what I asked was CLCPA implementation by individual state agencies.
Okay, no, cap and invest. I'm sorry. Did he ask about cap and invest? No. Oh, good. Okay, then I'm getting my brain back on. That happens with me frequently. So it seems to me, one, we know that cap and invest is actually the law. I think the state's even being sued over that small detail. But also, for my purposes, it's designed to make sure we are setting up a system that incentivizes the decrease of pollution and creates a source of funding, revenue, not from the ratepayers, to help us make sure we can move forward with the infrastructure modernization we need in order to meet our CLCPA goals. So for a while, I was asking a couple of you, like every month, any new updates on Cap and Invest? And sometimes I get told, oh yeah, soon. Then I decided that wasn't really working. So I sort of gave up asking every month. Although I'll be asking again during the budget hearings in a few months. So where are we on all this? Because we know we're losing an enormous amount of federal money, no matter what we do. And we know we have modernization requirements, not just from CLCPA, but just for the functioning of an energy grid and a mechanism to produce more energy, or lots of mechanisms. And so if not cap and invest, where are we getting the money?
Well, Senator, thank you for the question. Let me start. I think I'll start by maybe taking a step back and saying, you know, here at DEC, at least we are, and I think you can hear from my sister agencies on this conversation, we're all advancing a whole suite of regulatory and program opportunities and actions to address the CLCPA and making sure that we're doing emission reduction activities across the state. I think for us, that looks like things like RGGI that I brought up, that we're doing that program update right now to the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is such a successful way that we're reducing emissions in the power sector. And we're doing a 10-year update right now, working with other states to not only reduce that cap to make sure we're reducing emissions even further, but also providing that certainty to the regulated community, which I think is so critical. We're also doing a lot of work in the transportation sector, again, to reduce these greenhouse gas emissions and meet the goals of the CLCPA through things like working through the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition, while also advancing rebates and other resources for individuals who want to make that change on their own to electric vehicles. And so I could go on and on. I think what's also important right now that we're really prioritizing at DEC is the greenhouse gas reporting program. I think that is critical right now, especially in light of the changing federal environment, where previously the EPA had done a lot of work for states all across the country of really tracking and reporting on emission sources within your states. And they are walking back from that right now. So we in New York need to we need to step in and do that work, right? And the greenhouse gas reporting rule is designed, and our goal is, as we're advancing that we are stepping in and really have a broad understanding of the emissions across of our state, before any, you know, to ensure that as we're moving forward on other actions in line with the CLCPA, that we really have an understanding and we are doing that in a thoughtful way.
Anybody else want to throw in on this?
I'll make just a minor point and just say that, you know, Michelle listed off a couple other sources of funding. I think it's really important, you know, as a team collectively across the state, when we think about any revenue source, whether it's ratepayers or RGGI or Bond Act funding or whatever the source of funding is, we have to think holistically about the best use case for that funding. Every dollar counts, right? Our goals are important, and we want to make sure that we have the most efficient and effective use of funding. And that certainly is the area where we're keenly focused at the commission. But I think, you know, each one of our agencies plays a very unique role. We have various mechanisms at our disposal today. And so I think regardless of what happens in the future, we're very focused on what we have now and how we can best utilize the funding that's available.
And I'm curious, I mean, so you are the 4 lead agencies. You have a huge sort of set of requirements on you. And some people have asked me, and I don't know the answer, is it too broken up into too many different fiefdoms to have good coordination and get to best practice and get to the best answers? And should we be asking, is there a better way to reorganize the state agencies that have this giant set of requirements to accomplish our goals more quickly?
I can start there. Senator, I think that's a great question. I want to first start by highlighting how much this group is working together day in and day out. I want that to be known. I think that my colleagues on this phone already, I've only been here a little over a month and I've talked to them more times than I can count. We are constantly working together, not only through formal structures, right? I think you saw that as the scoping plan was developed. And there are, of course, update requirements down the line for that will require formal structures. But informally, day in and day out, we are all working together. And I can dare, commit for all of us that will always continue. And we want to make sure that even where there is overlap in programs, we are working hand in glove to make sure that we are doing our best to implement those within, our own duties as our agencies, but as a bigger state family under the direction of the governor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Oh, you've got
Go
a
ahead,
hand raised. Go. No, go. Okay. I guess, Senator, I might kind of approach that question a little bit different, because I would say, and not to say like there isn't a lot of collaboration that's needed. So Michelle's really right on point with that. I think there needs to be an appreciation of like how complex our economy is. And when we're looking at needing to take, and then when you take any one sector of the economy, say like our buildings, the myriad of different building types, different building uses, right? There's a real segmentation of each of those kind of emissions producing sectors that we need multiple types of interventions to try to get at, the emissions, and how do we get to those emissions in the most kind of optimized way possible, providing value to the building owner or the consumer, as well as ensuring that, we're not overburdening the economy with certain types of activities. So I think part of the issue is that we need to make sure we're not kind of brought into a narrative that things like, oh, if we only did this one solution, or if we had like one big approach, that there are these kind of singular answers. Like if there were these singular answers, I think we would have figured them out and then implemented them a long time ago. We would certainly want to make it as easy as possible to get to the outcomes that we're looking for. But the reality of the issue is that we're working within very, very complex systems that have actually been built up over decades with very different types of consideration. So how we think about taking both that existing environment, thinking about how we evolve to new environments, and what that means in each of those different segments of each of these sectors is requires very tailored kind of approaches in order to make sure that we've got successful outcomes. So I'm just saying we don't want to lose sight of that.
Yeah, I guess I think it's important to kind of take a step back. I think my colleagues made really good points about collaboration, but I think it's really important that the CLCPA recognize the need for a statewide approach, and each one of our agencies plays a very unique role in the fabric of state government, right? Our colleagues at DOT are responsible for transportation infrastructure. Our colleagues at Department of Health are responsible for the health of New Yorkers. Each one of our agencies has very unique expertise and a myriad of different things that they do on a daily basis that have nothing to do with the Climate Act, but are very important viewpoints that need to be heard. And so in the same way that we, through commission proceedings, which, I know can be complex, but every single entity, stakeholder-wise, across the state has a voice, but our agencies do too. And so while we at the commission have experts in engineering or accounting or economists or, et cetera, and they're very good at rate making and policy design, folks at DEC may have information that's really helpful for us to consider from, wetlands or threatened and endangered species that we need to consider. Or folks at ESD have things on the horizon for economic development that we need to make sure we're accounting for in our transmission plans. So I don't necessarily think that having one entity that's trying to tackle all these things and be experts in everything is necessarily the best approach, because we've built this very strong network of experts over decades. And many of us have been around for more years than maybe we want to admit, because we would show our age. But I think we're really proud about, the ways that we've structured our agencies to tackle this problem, and the receptivity that we're seeing from our colleagues that, 5+ years ago maybe weren't as familiar with clean energy policy or, needing to decrease emissions, but they've embraced that. And they're coming to us with viewpoints that maybe we weren't thinking about, but have significantly changed the way that we've shaped our policies for the betterment of everybody. So I think it's really important that we recognize that having different expertise is exactly what I think the CLCPA was designed to accomplish. And, I think that type of collaboration is very important.
Okay. And tied into that, and I accept those points, particularly that it's a very complex economy that you're all integrated into. So, and yet, when we heard from the localities before you, how difficult it is sometimes to coordinate with the state for the things they think they need to deliver at the local level. And as they point out, the counties and the cities, they're the level of government who actually has to operationalize and deliver these things. And so from what you both said, for example, the concern that, like, who is sort of organizing or overseeing the fact that this whole effort we're all making with CLCPA and the future of the state ties into training people for the jobs that they will have, you know, starting now for the next 50 years, as opposed to the jobs they have had for perhaps the last 100 years. Because we get complaints about that all the time. People don't trust us when we say, no, you don't understand. We're not going to lose jobs. We're going to add to the economy. All of this effort creates new kinds of jobs, good paying jobs in New York. And we want to be all one voice in moving in that direction. And trust me, from many legislative hearings and people yelling at me, that's not believed out there, even though it's true. And issues of, you know, they talk about the goals they have to accomplish with, say, a NYSERDA program or a funding stream that might be available if they can figure out how to get into it. But there's not sort of, they even talked about the hubs, I think they called it, that I think, is it NYSERDA has the hubs?
Yes. Yep.
Yes, okay. That even, you know, one entity says, no, it's working pretty well for us. And the other entity was like, no, there's one person for like 8 counties. There's no way to get the information or organizing. And so I just don't know. I don't necessarily have a solution, by the way, but I feel like we're not doing as much as we could be doing in better coordination with people perhaps beyond your agencies talking to each other. So talking to the localities, the counties, the municipalities on what it is that they say, like, we really need to get through with you all. And say, frankly, we're frustrated and lost. And I don't know whether there's some mechanism. And look, I know we don't have enough money for enough staff. I totally get that. And you can feel free to testify at my budget hearing that that's true. It's okay with me. But I don't know. I feel like we need to be doing a better job at the coordination. And when we get to the transmission issue, so Charles, be ready. Like, we just learned that 11 states on the West Coast figured out how to do 11 state coordination on transmission. And so later on, I'm going to be asking you, how's our multi-state coordination going? Because I'm just worried right now about our throughout the state of New York coordination. So is there something we all can be doing better to be more helpful to our local governments, our counties, our municipalities, even our legislative offices, to make sure that we're telling people the right things, that we're directing people in the right ways? I'm still just struggling to try to figure this out to make it work better.
I can start for us, Senator, and I imagine my colleagues will have other points, because this is such a bread and butter thing that we're always trying to get better at, right? We always want to make sure we're being more supportive of our local government partners, because I think, as been stated, we cannot implement the CLCPA without partners at all levels of government. That is clear when we're talking about a change of this magnitude. I'd point to some success areas, but hear you loud and clear on there's definitely more to do. You know, DEC's Climate Smart Communities program is really designed to help target this. It created to really help communities make this transition and take actions to, you know, reduce the effects of climate change on their communities and address greenhouse gas emissions. And in that process, we are working to lead outreach and education opportunities to help local governments if they are creating their own scoping plan or really looking at how they want to address their emissions within their jurisdiction. So we are happy to continue to work on that. Thank you for the note that staff is always a limiting factor, but this is a priority of ours that we want to continue to work on. And I'm happy to, if there's specific communities that come to mind, take those back, please. We will work on those to make sure that we can continue to see if they're in this program and find ways to help collaborate with them. But also hear you loud and clear that there is work more that we could do. And I will take that back to my folks as well.
And John, you had your hand up also.
Yeah, and I guess I'm going to just maybe echo a little bit of like this continuous improvement. You know, we need to make sure that we're always thinking about, you know, we're not, you know, putting forward what might be the perfect solution for every community, every municipality. You know, sitting alongside the DEC climate smart communities, you know, NYSERDA is also implementing our clean energy communities, which I think, you know, the intended sort of dovetailing of those two activities is climate smart is really getting to decision makers and, you know, how do localities best understand the value proposition of taking, you know, climate action within their localities. And then like having NYSERDA with suites of, you know, opportunities to get those communities to realize the decisions that they're actually making. So we are looking to try to make sure that we are working kind of in that coordinated fashion to be able to provide the locality with what they want, you know, and honestly, like sometimes not every community wants the exact same thing. So we have to make sure we're meeting each of those communities where they're at and providing them both with the services that they're looking for now, but also giving them the education to understand what additional action looks like going forward, even if it is something that they might initially say like, oh, I can't go there right now, but we can work with them to demonstrate like, well, maybe you ought to be thinking about that and can be very helpful to doing that. Again, like there is a lot of kind of, again, continuous improvement. You know, we know what we know, we see what works, we improve what, you know, might be a bit of a struggle, but we're always wanting to get the input to understand like what could work better.
Hey.
What I might add to that is, you know, we talked a little bit about the complexity of what the economy looks like today. We talked about the complexity of what the grid looks like today. And what that tends to mean is I think the sort of Lord of the Rings, one solution, one ring to rule them all is tough in a complicated, highly segmented economy with power tied into economic development and electricity needs. So, you know, one thing we try to do, I mean, we're sort of the engineer builder, Bob the Builder organization among the groups that are up here, is we tend to look at it from a project perspective. So, you know, what that means is going into a community, really understanding what the needs are, what the demands are, and then figuring out, it's almost like finding the right tool set that you can bring to solve a problem, right? It's a very typical engineer mindset. So for us, you know, if our customer team is working, for example, with the Port Authority, we've been able to design one of the largest solar projects in New York City, which is a combination of a solar canopy project. You know, it has it's a 12 megawatt project, 7.5 megawatts of battery storage, and then there's a community solar piece. That was a function of us being able to go in, find the right solution, the right site, the right customer, work very closely with the community to understand what the needs are, and then be able to design a solution that was oriented around that problem. So sometimes rather than sort of a top-down, a bottom-up approach we found to be pretty effective for negotiating the complexity of the system as it sort of emerged.
Okay, now we're going to turn to, I think, Michelle Hinchy for the last last 3 minutes of this section.
Thank you. I think actually, Charles, you were just hitting on what was kind of swirling through my head in a form. One of the things too, I mean, there are so many municipalities, right? And so many layers of government. So your challenge is steep. But at the same time, a lot is happening on the ground in a lot of these communities that are creating really innovative, really interesting ways to deal with climate or whatever challenges they may have. So I think we talk a lot about how we're getting you all to get down into them and explain what we have and push that out. What is the relationship like on learning about the innovative programs that, you know, counties like Ulster or towns like Rhinebeck or others are doing, and then laddering that up through your agencies to maybe create bigger programs that could work across the state based on what's happening on the ground? How have you seen, has that worked, and what are ways that we could help foster maybe that movement if needed?
I'm kind of going through my head, Senator, to try to think of an example. It's not coming to me at the moment, but I would say that that happens really quite routinely, right? I mean, as even if we are kind of working with a community, working with a municipality on what we all think is the outcome that we're looking for, we might get to a point where we're just saying, wait a minute, like we just changed kind of what the parameters of this are, which can then help to inform kind of whether it's programming that we have or the outreach strategies that we put in place in other places. So we're always looking for those learned experiences, because I do agree with you. There is a lot of great thinking that's happening, and we shouldn't be kind of, at least at NYSERDA, sitting at NYSERDA thinking like if every community in the state just would do this, then we would be in a great place. So it is a question of understanding like where the community's at, why they got there, how they figured on something that worked, and then we leverage that all the time.
It would be good for us to know some of those, and I think on where they are, because when we're talking about budgetary, right, we're always trying to come up with new programs to solve issues that are happening. And so if you're seeing programs that are maybe small but could be scaled to solve solutions around, it'd be good to get that information back to us so we can help.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say like, and maybe one thing I would say is like, because we do have like lists, right? Like climate smart and clean energy communities, like we know what like top 10 type of things are that we would want to see. And then it's up to the community to figure out how they get there. So like those might be some of the places we can start at, but yeah, definitely we'll look into some of that learned experience and share that.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, so because we keep covering certain topics in not what necessarily I thought would be the order, which is great. I think now we're going to move on to our last 3 sections, although we've changed the combo a little bit. So we're going to jump into building and decarbonization issues for about 25 minutes. Then we're going to jump into transmission and storage issues, because they go directly together, for about 20 minutes. And then I think we would have maybe 10 minutes left for offshore wind issues, which just every day it's a new crisis, even though it's got so much promise. So if that's okay with our leader, Pete Harcum, I'm going to turn it over to him, ask the clock to be set at 25 minutes for, what did I just say, building decarbonization and gas transition.
Good plan, Captain Liz. Thank you. Not to beat a dead horse, I just want to put a point on the table about building decarb. The money for that will come and could come from Cap and Invest. So the longer we delay that program, the longer we have putting off the funds to begin meaningful building decarbonization. I want to talk about gas a little bit. We know the impact that methane has on climate change. Folds more potent greenhouse gas than CO2. We've discussed the affordability issue today, that renewables are per kilowatt hour cheaper than natural gas. If we talk about supply issues, that we hear from General Electric, they're 5 years away from delivering the next gas turbine. So without discussing any particular project, just natural gas in general, why are we even talking in New York about increasing the supply of natural gas when we're just going to be saddling our ratepayers with long-term legacy costs? We'll do nothing for new generation, and really will do nothing for lower cost energy. Why are we even having this discussion at this point in New York about flooding certain areas of New York with more natural gas?
Sure. I'll jump in first because on, one particular decision, the commission recently took an action. A couple of things in response to that, Senator. The commission back in 2020 instituted its gas planning proceeding. And part of that was out of recognition of the fact that we needed to have a venue for all stakeholders to actively participate in discussions about gas system planning. And so in 2022, we launched that process officially across all of the state's gas distribution utilities. And over the last several years have taken up a number of long-term natural gas plans across every utility, or the majority of utilities, I should say. And, a couple things, first, we need to make sure that the system that currently provides gas to more than half of New Yorkers on the residential side to heat their homes remains safe and reliable. And so that means needing to make sure that we're making necessary and system investments to do so. When it comes to needing to approve new infrastructure, whether it's pipelines or, peaking solutions like liquefied natural gas or other types of solutions, we're making sure that we're making the most efficient decisions that we can and the least cost decisions to make sure that that system stays reliable. When we think about, the electric and gas system, they operate very differently. And for gas, issues of reliability can be catastrophic. So when we think about needing to make sure that the system stays reliable, it can become a very serious issue. And we did face, a very near miss with Winter Storm Elliott back in 2022. And so we want to make sure that we never have that situation again in New York. I don't think any of us want to be in a position where we have, massive outages on the gas system in the coldest of extreme weather. And so we certainly see that as a lesson to make sure that we avoid. But another thing is, the CLCPA was passed several years ago. Despite that, customers make decisions about what types of solutions they want to have in their homes and businesses. And since then, we've seen continued increase of customers wanting to connect to the system. And so with those new connections, that increases the demand on an already very constrained natural gas system. So we have more people adding to the system. We also have people that are continuously reliant on it. And so for as long as customers use the natural gas system, we need to make sure that we have the systems and resources in place to make sure that their service remains reliable. At the same time, and I promise I'll wrap up quickly, at the same time, recognizing that there's consumer choice, and so consumers continue to heat their homes with gas or continue to adopt new equipment or build new buildings, there are other actions that the state and the commission have taken to limit that. So things like All Electric Buildings Act or resources that we as a commission have put in place to limit the ability for natural gas utilities to market gas service. We, over the last several years, have removed that from rate cases. So no more natural gas marketing. We've removed incentives for new natural gas equipment in the energy efficiency and building electrification space for the most part. So we're making sure that we remove the incentives that are encouraging people to adopt those technologies, while also, working across state government to adopt other new policies that may limit the expansion of the system. But I think it's really important just to stress that we need to make sure that we're making the right investments to keep the system reliable because so many consumers across the state still rely on it. And until they stop relying on it, we're going to have to continue evaluating those investments.
All right, I think my time is up. A lot of points and counterpoints here, but thank you. Liz?
Oh, thank you. I'm looking for other hands and I don't see them right now. So continuing on the gas transition and the building decarbonization and a point you just made, 5 years to get the supply chain for any new oil and gas. So you read that report that just came out from the agency that isn't joining us today about how we're in deep trouble. You understand that the green energy options have much shorter timeframes on them than some of the other plans, including the proposals on the new oil gas lines that have been floating through the process. Is Pete right? Like, that's not even an option for us when talking about our need for new energy at this time. I just want to confirm that That's a fact, right?
Sorry, I just want to clarify your question, but whether or not new natural gas generation is an option for us at this time?
Yeah, and also even so, they want to build these new oil and gas lines. The two applications have started to go through process. I don't know what time frame they've claimed even to run those lines are. So one question is, how long are they saying it would take them to run those lines? And obviously, they would need all the kinds of connections. That sounds like we wouldn't have the equipment to do for at least 5 years anyway. So I'm just trying to get my arms around what the reality of timelines are for those proposals.
Sure. You know, I want to say first that the project in question that we're talking about is still pending before one of these agencies for a decision. But I do think that, you know, we could double check the time frame from the developer. I think their estimation was that the project could be completed in 18 months, and that's just pipeline construction. Again, you know, to inject into the current system and meet current demands, as well as, you know, potential future demands. And that's focused just on supply infrastructure, not necessarily generation. I do think that, you know, the NYSER report highlights some things that, you know, we're continuing to evaluate across our agencies. Every resource takes time to develop. To your point, you know, we've seen estimates and we've talked to some of the developers of gas turbine equipment, for example, and, you know, 5 to 7 years potentially for supply chain equipment. But they're not the only, every generation resource is facing the same types of supply chain constraints. So we're focused on what are the resources that we can get to the grid. And I think another thing that's really important to emphasize is no two resources are the same when it comes to planning for our electric grid. And so when we think about contributions from various resources, you know, nuclear, for example, has a very, very high capacity factor. 95% of the capacity that it's stated to meet, for example, if it's 1,000 megawatts, they're achieving, you know, on average, at least 950 of that. That's actively getting delivered into the grid and actively meeting capacity requirements. And so that's an efficient resource. Renewables are intermittent, and that comes up a lot. And so they play a role on the system, but they don't meet the same level of like consistent capacity for reliability purposes. They deliver incredible amounts of energy, but they're not the same as hydropower or nuclear. Gas, very similarly, is what we would refer to as a fast ramping resource. So those units that currently operate in New York City, they play a role on days when you know, other resources aren't able to fill that gap. And so when we think about system planning, I think, you know, what the NYSER report highlights, what we're continuing to evaluate in our proceedings is the role that each resource plays, and that if we take certain resources offline, we need to make sure that we have equivalent solutions from the attributes those resources provide in place so that we don't risk the ability to keep consistent operation of the electric grid. So every resource has a role, and I think, you know, we're going to continue evaluating that as part of our broader energy plans, including the state energy plan, as well as near-term decisions that may need to be made in order to ensure the reliability of the grid.
Well, so you threw nuclear in, and we were probably trying to avoid nuclear only because I think Pete and I are of the opinion we need to talk about energy now. And nuclear or new nuclear is not a now storyline. I mean, I just came back from a visit north to Canada to check out Darlington and all the things they're doing there. And I know the state's meeting with them. And I'm saying, okay, what will this take? And they say, you know, realistically, a big one, 15 years. The small ones, maybe less, but there's still lots of concerns about those because we're still just experimenting. And then I come back and I read scientific articles from professors at our biggest university saying, well, actually, the small ones have even more problem risks than the big ones and more, you know, nuclear spent rod situations and lots of unknowns. And since there is no federal oversight on almost anything anymore, be really careful before you go down those roads just because the Trump administration is, sure, it's free day, do whatever you want. That's really scary. So, yeah. And of course, many people point out that the cost of nuclear is radically higher than anything else, and we have to factor that in as well. But I don't disagree with you. There's pluses and minuses to every road we go down. But I still think that New York has to answer the question, why are we so much further behind than many other states? I mean, if you look at how quickly Texas shifted to much more use of solar and wind, and they're an oil state, right? And so they were like, oh God, like, yeah, just being an oil state hasn't really worked that well for us. We're going to speed along with moving forward on renewables, wind, solar, and they did in a very short period of time. So I'm still just continually struggling with why we don't seem to be able to meet targets that other states in this country dealing with the sort of the same rules of the road are able to. And, you know,
Yeah.
John has.
John,
Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, John, do you want to jump in first, or I'll just be very, very quick. And I think Senator Krueger, you raised a good point. No two states are the same, right? I think we've had a lot of conversations with our colleagues, you know, across the country about how they're able to, what they're seeing in terms of the interest for renewable energy projects and maybe mechanisms or tools they put in place to improve interconnection or other processes. Texas has a very different resource availability mix when we think about solar and wind, and that affects the economics of projects. And so when we talk to developers that are trying to build resources in New York State, the availability of solar and wind factors into the profile of how their project is going to deliver in terms of energy, as well as, you know, returns for them in investing in New York. So I think we face that as an issue. You know, we don't have the same resource availability. That's one constraint. But, you know, I think there's also things like, you know, we've tackled a lot of our siting issues over the years. I think that was a massive improvement to what historically we had seen in terms of the permitting timeframe. So that's another thing that we've done. But I think, you know, there are areas of improvement, but I think it's important just to recognize that there are differences between our colleagues, but to the extent that we can learn from them, we definitely are.
John, you still had your hand up.
Yeah, no, thanks. You know, so not to reiterate what Jessica just said about, you know, the different resource that's available, and that's really why it's being developed so quickly, right? It is a very different kind of wind landscape that you see, and it's not even just Texas, right? It's the entire middle of the country that really has a tremendous resource, and they're building it out, you know, pretty rapidly because it's economic for them to do so, right? That's really the driver that's happening in a lot of those states, even though we might perceive them as having other energy, like embedded energy interests in their economy, right? They still want to be an oil and gas producer, but the wind that they can produce within their boundaries are really the cheapest resource that they can develop. So that's why they do it. And not to get on nuclear, but just to take on nuclear in a way, not necessarily specifically for nuclear, but to look at nuclear now. And I think a lot of people agree that, you know, we're in a bit of a long game when it comes to that particular technology. You know, we do need to learn, right? And, you know, so we do need to understand what the technologies are able to provide, like how can we get some of that in New York? Are there economic development opportunities that we create when we think about the supply chain that's necessary to support a national industry for these technologies? Those all sort of weigh into why we want to think about the possibility of nuclear in the near term. And, you know, NYPA is certainly taking a very strong look at what the possibilities are. And and DPS, we're working on our master plan to think about the considerations that we should be putting into place as we look at this technology type. And, you know, we'll be diving in deep into that. The thing to remember about nuclear and the time frame is that, you know, particularly, I'm just going to get to the energy plan. When we look at the energy requirements that are going to be necessary, even within the 15-year planning horizon. We are talking orders of magnitude difference in what we need to see. Part of that is due to, economic development, and I think we would all agree we want responsible economic development that's providing real values to New Yorkers, and not just economic development that have a lot of energy requirements for the sake of that. So there is different type of economic development we're probably going for. But when we also think about our decarbonization strategies, particularly with electrification of buildings and transportation, the amount of energy needed, of electricity needed to meet those loads as we see more penetration really does build up over that time period. And we are going to need to have, as Jessica was talking about, that mix of resources that are going to need to meet those very significant load increases over time. And some of that just means we need to understand part of that decision-making now, right? We need to start thinking about what decisions can we really move forward now, understanding the time lag between the decision and when we're actually realizing the energy, and what are we building those new energy resources? What type of load are we building those energy resources for? So a lot of that is really factoring into the way that we need to be thinking about the energy requirements out in the future, and what is the decision chain that we need to really take into account now.
Liz, can I chime in with just a
Yes.
follow-up based on this thread? I'm sorry to interrupt, but what I'm hearing a lot about generation and sources. I'm not hearing anything about environmental justice, which is at the core of the CLCPA. And when we talk about natural gas in the peaker plants, we had New York City on the panel before you. They don't want those plants extended. They don't want more natural gas. Those plants have an impact on the people who live there. And when we talk about nuclear, the village of Buchanan, which I represent, will be a nuclear waste site forever because the federal government has never figured out what to do with this stuff. So, we're not just talking about, energy supply, energy sources, energy need, energy generation. When we generate energy, it has an impact on the people who live there. And I just hope that that is not lost on this conversation, because there are real term impacts that the CLCPA acknowledges and dictates that we address. So, off my soapbox. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. You were not interrupting at all, Pete. We're jointly running this hearing. I actually not sure I have more questions on this topic. So I'm double checking whether anyone else, excuse me, is raising their hand. I don't think so. In which case I'm now going to jump us to, I'm so sorry. We had this discussion. I already announced it. So let me just double check my notes on how we changed things. Okay, so now we're going to, excuse me, transmission and battery storage issues. So if that's okay with everybody. Good. So there's a lot of questions about both of these issues. And so going on with transmission, I told Charles I was going to ask about this. Yes, every state's different and they have different capacities and different issues in their economy. But even like California, which has many similarities to New York in terms of lack of space and lots of regulations, but they keep seeming to be ahead of us, and including the fact that they've been willing to put more money in than we have. And now they seem to be doing this giant venture with all their neighboring states over there on the West Coast to dramatically up their opportunities for multi-state transition and shared energy. And I'm just curious whether we've been looking at any of those examples and saying, oh, we're near a whole bunch of other states. We do some things with them. Is that a good model for us to be exploring?
I can jump in here first, let's talk a little bit about transmission from NYPA's perspective. We're a part of the puzzle here, and I think Jess will probably jump in from the DPS side and give a little bit of a broader sense along with John. But from our perspective, we as mentioned, control about a third of the state's transmission system. That's over 1,500 circuit miles. We've been spending a lot of our time focusing on the upstate initially build out. So that's roughly $2 billion that we've injected into projects like SmartPath Connect, Central East Energy Connect. More recently, we've started the Propel New York partnership with Transco. It's a $3 billion investment, largely in Nassau County, but in adjacent areas. So that's our downstate component of it. These investments are critical. We like to say there's no transition without transmission. And from our perspective, making sure that we're able to connect electrons where they're being generated to where there's a need is one of the fundamental parts of the energy transition that is needed in order for us to get from here to there. In that regard, we're working very closely with the PSC and NYISO on making sure that we can streamline approvals and that we can align our planning with renewable development where possible. With respect to the broader integration and some of the models you've talked about, I actually think I'll kick it over to Jess, who can talk a little bit more about multi-state efforts.
Sure, quickly. So I think our partners in the West are catching up to us. New York and our regional collaborative ISOs have been coordinating for decades on regional planning. And, although the New York Independent System Operator is not a state agency, they are certainly a big part of the mix here when it comes to planning. And so the ISO in New York, the single state ISO, gives us a lot of benefits in terms of some of our other partners that have to rely on, the coalition of 11, states to make a decision on one project. So there are some benefits to having single state ISO control, which has benefited New York State. There are also benefits to regional collaboration. And about almost 2 years ago now, the governor took leadership with partners all throughout the Northeast in creating the Northeast States Transmission Collaborative, which I imagine John will weigh in on as well. But we've done a lot of work across that collaborative to look at potential projects where we could have state interties on bulk transmission solutions. So that's one massive benefit that we've seen. But, I think we certainly in the Northeast have been a leader and will continue to be a leader in regional collaborative approaches. The other thing I would say is we've also, when we did have funding at the federal government level for interstate transmission projects, we took leadership, in New York to partner with some of our sister states and go after some of that funding to be able to build transmission projects. And when we do that, I think an important thing that maybe doesn't get communicated as much is we want to make sure that if we do a multi-state project, that there's an equivalent distribution of the costs and benefits for those projects. And across our state partners, we have a shared goal in making sure that if we do those types of projects, that the benefits and the costs are spread equally amongst our ratepayers so that one state isn't, outsized bearing the cost of those projects without an equivalent delivery of benefits. So with that, I'll kick it over to John.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to have to start, Senator, with a bit of a flip response about our wonderful colleagues in the West, and I am very happy to see the agreement they have come to. I'm going to borrow a word that Jessica just used, but it literally took them decades to get to that agreement. I am not kidding. And it has been very contentious at times. It's been very on and off at times. So this was not an easy kind of decision for a lot of these states to get to. And I think part of what's getting them there is looking at California's policy, because very similar to New York, and the power requirements that, I think those other neighboring states are beginning to realize that if they were a host of the generation facilities, it doesn't really do them very good when they have limited economy. So moving, the economic development opportunity that those neighboring states are really looking to capitalize on now to move power to California, I think is really what the crux of what got them to that decision making. Again, applaud that they can do it. It's wonderful. The second flip answer I might also give is that, as Jessica noted, like New York is a one state ISO, one state regional transmission operating system. New York is actually seen, I think, nationally as really quite a success story when it comes to building new transmission. We have a process that, it engages both the Public Service Commission and the independent system operator. There's a lot of ensuring that there's a legitimate need, that there's a competitive approach to getting to that need, and that we actually move forward with projects that are identified as a need. And we have realized transmission projects that have improved New York's system functioning and efficiency. I want to say, like, we've had maybe, well, I think we've got more than just a handful of projects that have been determined and have come online within the last, 7 to 10 years. So, and I think people appreciate that New York actually has a functioning process when it comes to identifying, particularly for public policy, right? Those public policy transmission needs have been more successful in New York than they have been, I think, in other parts of the country. When it comes to like the regional interconnection, one thing that I'll just mention is that the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy, did a nationwide study. This is maybe about 2 years ago. It was completed. And they were looking at, what those transmission both needs were in different regions of the country, as well as, and needs being like from a reliability perspective, but also what are the economic opportunities that could be unleashed with some of national expansion of transmission. New York and the Northeast had the fewest identified projects coming from studies of the DOE that were necessary to both meet our needs as well as create economic opportunity. I think that that's, again, a statement that we really do understand how our system functions and what are the needs. And when we see that a need emerge, we're going to respond, we're going to get to it in a very efficient way. Now, I think where we have been thinking, particularly like with this collaboration we have with the other Northeastern states, where we had seen a very big opportunity space for transmission planning, was really in that offshore space. There's a lot of the Eastern coastal states are all thinking about, what nature of resource we can really extrapolate from that. The states really have not been hugely coordinated up in this, what I'm going to say is this very early industry development, right? We have a lot of these one-off projects that, New York has, its projects that it's been pursuing, and Massachusetts its, and New Jersey has its. I think, what really became an understood opportunity for us to think about when we look at multi-state regional transmission planning was thinking about that offshore resource. How could we really develop it in the most economic, efficient way? And then what did that mean in terms of how we would move that power from the offshore into the states, and how would it move among the states? That was great work that was happening, and that, like, I don't think we're going to think of it as we won't ever look at it ever again. But that would be the one place I would say that, if we were going to really hone in on, what an opportunity for transmission planning would be, like, it would be to try to revive, how we think about that offshore transmission planning opportunity, which really would be very exciting. Not to discount other like interregional transmission that might be valuable over time as well, but that is perhaps, the one space that I would say where having New York's focused attention on transmission planning really could lead to some very significant outcomes.
Muted. Sorry, I was muted. So tying back to just internal to the state, not multi-state, transmission and storage. So even when a statement was made that some of the other sustainable forms of energy aren't as reliable, because you have the sun go down at night. That's the example I've always heard about solar. So that's why battery storage and mass storage opportunities are so important to us, tied in directly to our transmission system. And so, for example, when we did an RFP asking communities, are you open to having a nuclear site? Why didn't we do an RFP asking communities if they're open to battery storage sites, probably preferably connected to where there's already existing energy being produced in some format. So you just hook up battery storage to transmission that already exists, or production that already exists near transmission lines. I mean, are we trying that at all? It's going back to my colleague Michelle Hinchy's point. Why are we just leaving it up to developers to say, oh, this looks like a good place for us, and then you hit up against all this community opposition? Well, maybe you should be asking the communities, hey, how are you about battery storage sites, which is going to, increase tax revenue for your community, and increase opportunities for connections to energy production of the right kind and transmission. Are we doing anything like that among your agencies?
Yep, I'll jump in first. So a couple things on that point. I think, we actually do have a pretty large amount of solar plus battery projects in the queue, so to speak, both on the distributed side, as well as projects that we've either authorized previously for a permit on the large scale side or are forthcoming. And that's one way that we certainly hear from communities. On the community-driven side, we had a process that took place over several years to develop the energy storage roadmap, which ultimately led to the NYSERDA incentive programs that we authorized earlier this year. And in that proceeding, we engaged a lot of stakeholders. We heard from communities in that process, and they certainly voiced their perspectives about how they feel about storage within their communities. And we took that in, we're going to continue taking that into account. I think the other thing that has been really interesting is, the Rapid Act rulemaking. As I mentioned before, we went across every region of the state, and we had a lot of misconceptions about how energy storage is sited currently in the state that we address with those communities. And right now, battery storage systems for the most part are sited locally. There isn't as much of a state role there. The commission plays a very minor role for battery storage projects over 80 megawatts, which are massive. And those are not the majority of projects that are getting built or are trying to be built across the state. So we answered a lot of questions about those concerns. We also, through the Interagency Fire Safety Working Group of the governor, did a lot to go out across regions of the state, conduct informational webinars, hear from communities, and make sure that in whatever future codes or standards or other types of regulations that we as a state team develop, that we're taking into the concerns, the risk and other concerns that communities have, and making sure that we address some of those misinformation or misconceptions about the technology and, help ease their comfort about the potential impacts that a facility like a battery storage project could have in their communities. And then I would say that, I don't think it's a surprise to any of us. I think a lot of us are seeing the news and, hearing from communities, but there is a very big opposition to these resources that we have to try to tackle. And I think, through efforts, whether it's ORES or the department staff or staff at NYSERDA or other agencies, NYPA also, has a role to play in energy storage. I think everybody is out there trying to, hear those concerns, try to engage with communities about optimal locations. And when we think about battery storage, there is actually not every site in New York is going to be great for battery storage. There is an analysis that has to be done about proximity to transmission, generation, the role that a battery storage can play. To your point, Senator Krueger, maybe solar is intermittent, but it's still a hugely valuable resource. And we're able to capture the extra energy that's generated from those projects and dispatch it at times when it's more needed. So storage can provide a very critical role in balancing that intermittency of those resources. We've recognized that. We expanded the CLCPA's goal from 3 gigawatts to 6 gigawatts. And so we're firmly committed to the resource. And I think, also hearing from the community side where optimal locations would be, but very importantly, addressing the concerns that they're raising about, potential impacts of siting those resources.
So I'll just point out that someone else from your agency recently said to me, the biggest crisis we're facing is not having battery storage for moving forward. So I hope that you are right, that all of these things can get implemented as quickly as possible. But I fear that your overestimating your ability to get this stuff done in the timeline and that we need to up the ante. When I was up in Ontario and I asked them, how are your communities handling battery storage? They were like, oh, it's no problem at all. I go, didn't they get upset and freaked out originally? They go, yeah, but we like paid for 5 pilot projects and everything went great. And the communities never opened their mouths again afterwards. I was like, oh, that's a good lesson to be learned. Because I do think we have communities where when you say battery storage, they think you're talking little bike batteries that are going to be blowing up every 10 minutes. And I'm from New York City, so we're used to the bike batteries blowing up every 10 minutes. But I actually feel like we should change the word and not use the word battery. Because it's completely different technology, completely different realities. And Michelle Hinchy has her hand up.
Thank you. No, Senator Krueger, thank you for that question and for those comments. And I think Jessica, same. I agree. And I think something that we as a state are not doing a very good job on is combating misinformation. I'm living through it right now. And it's not, we're not doing it. The state, we don't have the partners and our agencies that we're looking to, we're not breaking through. You guys are not being able to connect with folks in a way that is actually, that people can actually hear. And I say that just because I've been living in it for the last 4 months, trying to get people to understand that battery storage is critical to our energy goals. And the same people who are saying we need to hit our goals and who are chastising the state for not hitting our goals are the same people who are now trying to block battery storage in very progressive blue pro-environment areas. And that should send shockwaves to all of us who are doing this work to figure out how we can better communicate, and not just communicate, but show people that we can move forward in this space. The panel just before this, Leo from Sustainable Westchester brought up the point of there are many locations across the state, including and especially, I think it's really important to show the ones that are in New York City that are going off without a hitch, because the pushback we always hear is the fires in California from a couple years ago, but the fires in California, no one even knows that there's battery storage facilities in New York City. They don't even know it. And so we have to, our agencies have to do a better job of showing that, of celebrating those projects, and of really clearly showing the community what is possible. And so my question would be, what are the plans to celebrate the projects that we have that Leo mentioned in the panel just before that I think all of you were listening to? What are their plans to celebrate those things and to actually better communicate that of what's happening in residential areas today?
And Michelle, can I just echo what you're saying? I think what you just said is so vitally important that we are not breaking through. There is a concerted disinformation campaign in New York State on battery storage, and Michelle is absolutely right. With all due respect, our state agencies have not made the case to the general public. Those of us who are policy nerds understand why we need battery storage. But to Michelle's point, to rank and file folks in our communities, the disinformation is what they're hearing. And by the time someone shows up at a local community board meeting, it's too late. So I just want to echo what Michelle said, and thank you for the question, Michelle.
Thank you. Yeah, and not to take more time, but I'll just say people are because when I say we need battery storage, they tell me I'm bought off by special interests. They want to hear from the state, but they're not hearing it aggressively enough, and from kind of third party, experts in this space that are able to push it. And I need help to be able to bring these resources forward. I think we all do.
I see John's hand and Jessica's hand, I think, in response.
Great. Well, so point taken about, needing to make sure that we have very easily absorbed messages about, what we're looking to get out of these technologies and why they're beneficial not only to the grid at large, but why a locality should not feel like it needs to run away from the technology. Maybe, and this is helping me to level set a little bit, because I'm going to just throw out some statistic here, but I need to fact check the numbers. So bear with me on that at some point. But the thing that we're also seeing is that there really are quite a few number of communities that have taken that sort of misinformation and converted it into action. Right. So we've looked at, all of the municipalities with the siting, that have that siting authority. It was something like only 12% of communities in New York State have actually taken an action on storage technologies. Half of them supportive actions, where they're looking to facilitate battery installations, and maybe half of them, so this is like 6% of municipalities, have like either taken like the moratorium step or other negative response. So I think that that's a little bit of, where I think we focus a lot of time and attention on that segment of the market. But the way that I see it is that the vast majority of municipalities are really trying to figure this out. And how can they navigate when either it's a project coming forward or the misinformation is coming forward? Again, point very well taken. We need to have much more concerted action. We have been dealing with this, I would say, on a very individualized basis, whether it's project specific or whether municipalities are reaching out to us, and we have like a whole kind of toolkit of permitting activities and other types of information that municipalities can really leverage to make sure that if the municipal decision making is to move forward with a storage project, that they have all the tools at their disposal as well to be able to ensure that the local residents are feeling confident in what they're going to be doing. Part of what we've been doing at NYSERDA, in response, Senator, to the fire issues, is to try to take that on head on. And so so we've created a group. We've looked at all of the different kind of considerations that need to be taken into account if a facility is moving forward in a locality, from, what does the fire department training need to look like? What are the emergency plans that need to be put into place? What is the design engineering, preconditions that have to be met in order for a system to advance? All of those have actually been incorporated into the state fire prevention and building construction codes earlier this year. And I think we are sort of seen as the state that has tried to take this on as strongly as possible and have moved forward with real actions that should hopefully raise the confidence in the public generally around these vital technologies. Yes, I'm not going to discount that. But fair point, there's more we can also be doing.
We've touted the fire regulations. It's not enough. It's good. It's great that we've done that as the state, really important. Without that, we wouldn't have much to stand on. Not enough. That's not what people, that's not the thing that's breaking through for people to hear it. We need to show it.
Hear that. Yep.
Okay, we've got, Jessica and Charles wanting to jump in on this, and then we'll shift to wind.
Sure. I actually withdrew my hand because I think John hit all of the key points, but I think, to Senator Hinchey and to others, I think we welcome the opportunity to partner with the legislature to get the message out. The media is a powerful tool, and we've seen the impact that it can have. I think you just shared an article, but we are seeing articles every week about battery storage. We've put out op-eds across our agencies to try to combat misinformation and have a voice in the media. But I think, what's unfortunate is that we're seeing more of the news is about all of these concerns and risk and, et cetera. I think what we need to see, to your point, is more success stories, communities that are stepping up and saying, talking about how they've embraced the technology. And I do think that there are willing partners out there. I think we've seen some communities that are willing to, whether it's, put a quote in a press release or to, join their own, media effort. I do think that more of that is powerful, and welcome further collaboration on that.
Charles?
Yeah, I would just jump in and amplify a lot of what's been said, but having those case studies where you have real examples at a community level of these projects working people living with them not creating an issue. Keep in mind, in some of the smaller communities, the firefighters are volunteer. They're part of that community. They are folks who are your neighbors. Those are folks who are going to have, frankly, more impact at the local planning board than national media. So this kind of work really has to be done at a very local level, and it has to be done over time. I mean, I think Senator Krueger, you made the excellent point about how new technologies over time can be shifted based on engagement. And so that engagement has to be sustained. It can't be episodic, and it has to be really deep. And so I think starting where you have areas where there's strong support or the potential for strong support makes a lot of sense. We actually have a 20 megawatt battery energy storage facility upstate that has received pretty positive support from the community, including the local elected official up there. And so it's not really just a partisan issue. It's an issue of really working with these communities and getting them comfortable with the technology. And this is not the only example of that type of technology where you have that issue, but it can be overcome with sufficient effort.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Charles. I just want to quickly respond. Most of the communities in upstate New York are volunteer, not just some really small ones. Most of the communities in upstate New York, outside of New York City or outside of Southern Westchester, are volunteer. And so, and many of them are running on budgets of $100,000. Right? Like that's how they buy all their equipment, how they do upgrades, all of the things. So it's not surprising that a new technology coming in is very concerning for people. But I think that's where we are looking to you all. I don't have a successful battery storage plant in my district. I can't tout it. We are looking to you all as our agencies who are working in this space, who know what's happening across the state and know where the communities are positive, to help uplift what's going forward and to understand what worked to get people to finally understand why they're safe. This isn't the legislature to do this. We need our agencies and you all as the experts in this space to be able to combat that misinformation. We cannot do it. We are trying desperately. We cannot do it. We need the experts and the trusted scientists and people who've been doing this work for years, who can point to this place that you've just said in upstate New York. I don't know about it because it's not my district. That's what we need to be able to bring in. And we're not seeing those stories from the agencies when they do talk to our constituents. And so I would ask all of you have said many times that you all work together, pick up the phone many times a day. I would ask you all to put together a strategy that is, constructive, that can be done and deployed in communities as projects are being discussed, so that we can have accurate information out before it's overrun by very concerted, well-oiled machines that are working to have these programs not go forward.
So we're going to skip wind because we don't have the time and it's too big an issue. But I would just, before I turn it over to Pete Harcum to make his closing comments, I just want to echo, yes, it's not just misinformation hopping up all over the state. It's intentional. It's a targeted campaign against green anything. And they grasp the opposition that if we actually master battery storage, that they just have much weaker arguments for the gas oil side. So we need the governor to actually come out and be a spokesperson for us to help educate all of our communities, and frankly, to call out the false information that is being intentionally distributed about the dangers of batteries. Like, they never want to talk about when buildings blow up because of gas oil. It's situations when people die from gas oil, to the tune of thousands of people per year in New York State. But they've got plenty of false information about why a battery storage plant anywhere near where you live could be a disaster. The same way as they attack wind by saying there was a propeller that fell off somewhere and killed a bird. I'm sorry the bird got killed. I actually don't think that's a comparative analysis of the dangers of wind versus oil gas to our future. And with that, I'm going to shut up and thank all of you for your participation and hand it to Pete Harcum.
Well, thank you so much, Liz. Thanks to you and your team. I want to thank my team, who were very instrumental in planning this series of hearings. And I want to thank all of you, all our panelists. Thank you for this discussion. It's been 4 hours, and we want to thank you for sticking it through. We know there's a lot of planning from your teams that goes into this. It is a collaboration, as we've discussed today. There is no one size fits all. We realize we have more work to do, and there's going to be collaboration between the legislature and the executive and the agencies. Want to thank Senator Hinchey, Senator May, Senator Gennardis for being with us, and more to come. You know, this is really an ongoing conversation, and we once again want to thank everyone for your collaboration, and we want to thank everybody who's joined us here on Zoom and is watching us on YouTube as well. So thank you. And with that, I think we'll sign off.
Thank you all,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.